Hello everyone, I am Uncle Joe, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Believe me, this story will put you to sleep in no time, because if anyone knows how to do that, it's me. Get comfortable and relax. The headlights emerged unexpectedly, twin beams slicing through the enveloping darkness behind me. I leaned closer to the rearview mirror, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. Where had this truck come from? The highway had been desolate for miles. It was well past midnight, and I was navigating the final stretch of a long, exhausting cross-country drive. My eyelids felt heavy, like sandpaper, as the endless ribbon of road stretched on before me. As I drove, the asphalt ahead blurred into a hypnotic streak. I had been pushing myself to make it home before dawn, but now, with this truck bearing down on me, I was wide awake. The cab loomed large in my mirror, impossibly close. I tapped my brakes, hoping the driver would take the hint and back off, but no luck. If anything, it seemed to inch even closer. "Come on, just pass me already," I muttered, easing over to the right lane. The truck matched my move perfectly, staying right on my tail. I could practically count the rivets on its grille, and my heart began to race. It was an unusual scene, even for the most restless of drivers. I pressed down on the accelerator, feeling the speedometer climb steadily, 70, 75, 80 miles per hour. The truck beside me kept pace effortlessly, never faltering. A cold sweat began to bead on my forehead as I realized I was alone on this deserted highway, with a truck that seemed intent on pushing me off the road. My thoughts raced through unsettling possibilities. Road rage, a drunk driver, or perhaps something even more sinister. Then, I spotted a sign for an upcoming rest stop and made a quick decision to pull in there. In the stillness of the night, I found myself on a winding road, the shadows stretching around me like whispered secrets. As I took the exit, I noticed the truck trailing closely behind, a chill creeping up my spine. I muttered a quiet curse, my hands trembling as I maneuvered through the darkness towards the rest area. The parking lot emerged, bathed in the eerie glow of a flickering streetlight, its emptiness amplifying the tension. I parked near the restroom, the engine falling silent, yet the truck's headlights cast a harsh glare in my rearview mirror, momentarily blinding me. I shut my eyes tight, my heart racing, knowing that whatever was about to unfold was inevitable. As the seconds ticked by, a heavy silence enveloped me. The light behind me faded away, and with a slow, deliberate motion, I opened my eyes and turned around. The parking lot lay empty, devoid of the truck, the headlights. Only darkness remained, accompanied by the faint buzz of the streetlight above. I sat there, frozen, as if time itself had paused, my mind wrestling with the reality of what had just transpired. Had I imagined it all? Was my exhaustion so profound that I had conjured a menacing truck from thin air? Eventually, I mustered the courage to step out of my car. The cool night air brushed against my face, a gentle reminder that I was still here, still awake, still in the midst of this eerie stillness. As I strolled a lap around the parking lot, a sense of unease lingered, expecting the truck to materialize at any moment. Yet, there was no trace it had ever been there. As the adrenaline ebbed, weariness settled in. I resolved to catch some rest in my car before resuming my journey. I reclined the seat and closed my eyes, but sleep eluded me. Each time I began to drift, I would jolt awake, convinced I had heard the distant rumble of an engine. The sky was just beginning to brighten when I finally surrendered to wakefulness. Coffee was essential if I was to continue on my way. As I started the car and eased out of the rest stop, I found myself glancing nervously at my mirrors, hoping for no sign of the truck. The highway lay before me, hauntingly empty, as I merged back onto it. My nerves were frayed, and every vehicle that appeared in the distance sent my heart racing. Yet none were the truck that had pursued me. About an hour later, I caught sight of a 24-hour diner just off the highway, its parking lot half full, a comforting sight after the desolation of the night. I pulled in, yearning for caffeine and the warmth of human connection, the bell above the door chiming softly as I entered. As I stepped inside, a few heads turned my way before returning to their conversations or plates of food. I settled into a booth by the window, still able to keep an eye on my car parked along the highway. A waitress approached, coffee pot in hand, and with a knowing glance at my disheveled appearance, she asked, "Rough night?" as she filled my cup. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "You could say that. Had a bit of a scare on the highway." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, what happened?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling a bit foolish. How could I explain what I'd experienced without? It was a strange encounter, one that still lingers in my mind. There was this truck that seemed to shadow me for miles, its presence unnerving as it rode my bumper. When I finally pulled over at a rest stop, it simply vanished into thin air. The waitress, her expression shifting, caught my attention. I noticed a flicker of recognition in her eyes as she glanced around, then leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're not the first to come through here with a story like that," she said. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. She sighed, sliding into the seat across from me. "In the past few months, we've had a handful of drivers stop in here, all shaken up about a truck that chased them. On the highway, always at night, always on that stretch you came in on." I leaned forward, hanging on her every word. "Did they see who was driving it?" I asked. She shook her head. "That's the thing. No one ever sees a driver, and the truck always disappears without a trace." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you think it means?" The waitress shrugged, but her eyes were serious. "I don't know, but there's been a string of robberies on that highway lately. Cars found abandoned, drivers missing. The police haven't been able to." As I pondered the mystery, my thoughts danced around the shadows of a phantom truck, slipping away like a wisp of smoke. Unsolved robberies lingered in the air, each detail weaving a tapestry of unease. "Has anyone reported this truck to the police?" I inquired, my voice steady. She nodded, a hint of frustration in her eyes. "A few have tried, but without evidence, and with the truck always vanishing, well, let's just say the police aren't taking it too seriously." I leaned back, letting the weight of her words settle in. A flicker of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone in this unsettling experience, not the only one caught in the web of the unknown. It was a strange night, filled with an unsettling tension that hung in the air. The lonely stretch of highway seemed to whisper secrets of fear and uncertainty. The waitress, sensing the unease in my gaze, offered a gentle touch to my hand. "You made it here safe, and that's what truly matters," she said, her voice soothing. "If you can, stick to driving during the day. And if you happen to see that truck again, find a public place quickly." I nodded, appreciating her kindness and the caution she shared. Just as she turned to return to her duties, a thought struck me. "Wait," I called after her. "You mentioned there have been robberies?" Missing drivers lingered in my mind, yet I felt no sense of robbery. The truck had barely slowed when I pulled over. She turned back, a grim expression shadowing her face. Perhaps I had been fortunate, or perhaps they were merely observing, studying my habits and reactions for the next encounter. With that unsettling thought, she walked away, leaving me alone with my cooling coffee and racing thoughts. I lingered in the diner far longer than intended, nursing cup after cup as I watched the sunrise unfold. The normalcy of the morning rush anchored me, a gentle reminder that the world continued on. It wasn't all dark highways and phantom trucks. When I finally returned to the road, a sense of control washed over me. The highway, bathed in daylight, appeared less menacing, yet an unsettling feeling lingered, as if unseen eyes were upon me. Somewhere out there, the driver of that ghostly truck seemed to be biding their time, waiting for another chance. I arrived home without further incident, but the experience clung to me. I found myself delving into the history of highway robberies in the area, searching for patterns or clues. The thought of reporting my encounter even crossed my mind. To the police, but I always hesitated. What could I possibly say that wouldn't sound utterly absurd? Weeks drifted by, and gradually, the sharpness of that night began to dull. I still steered clear of that stretch of highway after sunset, yet the relentless fear began to wane, and life resumed its course. Then, about a month after my unsettling encounter, a news report chilled me to the bone. An abandoned car had been discovered on Andrew Highway, the driver mysteriously missing. Witnesses claimed to have seen a large truck lurking in the vicinity just before the disappearance. As I sat there, transfixed by the flickering screen, a sense of dread washed over me. A chill ran down my spine as I pondered whether I had truly escaped that night or merely postponed the inevitable. The highway lay before me, a dark ribbon slicing through the night. Each set of headlights in my rearview mirror made me flinch, and every passing truck sent my heart racing. The once peaceful solitude of a late-night drive had been shattered, replaced by a persistent, gnawing fear. One thing was certain: I would never view an empty highway the same way again, for now I understood that sometimes, in the stillness of the night, those highways hold secrets that often go unnoticed, and the shadows that dwell within them can be more persistent than one might expect. As the shovel met something solid, a shiver coursed through my arms. I took a moment to wipe the sweat from my brow, my hand now caked in mud. We had been digging for what felt like an eternity, convinced that the well would yield nothing but dirt for at least another 10 feet. I called down to my son, Tyler, who was laboring beside me in the depths of the hole. "Hey, grab the flashlight, will you? I think we hit something." Little did I know what awaited us beneath the surface. In the stillness of the night, a metallic clang echoed, a sound that would alter the course of everything. 6 months had passed since I inherited this farm from my uncle, a true fixer-upper, to say the least. It offered a chance for a fresh start after the divorce. Tyler and I had immersed ourselves in the labor, repairing fences, mending the barn, and now digging a new well. The old one had long since run dry, and water was essential for our dreams of revitalizing this place. As Tyler shone the flashlight, the beam caught something smooth and metallic, glinting in the darkness, a stark contrast to the rugged surroundings. Dark earth enveloped us as Tyler's voice broke the silence, a blend of curiosity and apprehension. "What is that, Dad?" I shrugged, my hands working tirelessly to uncover the mystery. "I don't know, Bud. Let's find out." As we dug deeper, the object began to reveal itself. A metal container, roughly the size of a small suitcase. Its once shiny surface was now marred by pitting and corrosion. My thoughts swirled with possibilities. A time capsule? Buried treasure? Or perhaps just some forgotten farmer's junk? Took us another hour of careful digging to. As we freed the container from the earth, the sun began to set, casting long shadows that danced across the field. We carried our discovery back to the barn, both of us enveloped in silence, each lost in our own musings about what secrets lay within. Under the stark glare of the barn's floodlights, I scrutinized the container more intently. It was sealed tightly with no clear means of access. A faded inscription barely peeked through the years of corrosion, its message lost to time. "Should we open it?" Tyler inquired, practically bouncing with anticipation. Excitement coursed through me, yet hesitation lingered. Part of me considered calling the police or perhaps a lawyer. What if this was evidence of something significant? But curiosity ultimately prevailed. "All right," I said, reaching for a crowbar. "Stand back." Took some effort, but at last, the lid creaked open. The smell enveloped us first, musty and damp, reminiscent of an old cellar. Inside, shielded by layers of waxy paper, lay a stack of documents and photographs. I picked up the first photo, holding it beneath the light. It depicted a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, smiling at the camera. The picture was Old, likely from the 1960s, judging by her hairstyle and clothes. I turned it over, and in faded ink was written Rachel Crawford, 1969. Tyler peered over my shoulder. "Who's that, Dad?" I shook my head. "I don't know." But as I said it, a nagging feeling began to stir in the pit of my stomach. The name Crawford felt familiar, yet I couldn't place why. We spent the next hour sifting through the contents of the box. There were more photos, all of a young woman named Rachel at various locations around what appeared to be this very farm. There were also, as I sifted through the letters, newspaper clippings, and a small leather-bound journal. A yellowed newspaper clipping slipped from the pages, landing softly at my feet. The headline sent a chill down my spine. "Local woman still missing after 3 months." My heart raced as I read the article, detailing the mysterious disappearance of Rachel Crawford from her family's farm in the summer of 1969. Despite a thorough search, no trace of her was ever uncovered. The article revealed that Rachel's father, the farm's owner, had been the primary suspect, yet he was never charged, the investigation stalling due to a lack of evidence. "Evidence, Dad." Tyler's voice pulled me back to the present. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tyler, I think we just found evidence in a very old missing persons case." His eyes widened. "Really? Like a real mystery?" I nodded, my mind racing. "Yeah, Bud, a real mystery." I began gathering up the documents, careful not to disturb them more than necessary. "We need to call the police." The next few hours passed in a blur as deputies arrived at the farm, followed by detectives and a crime scene unit. Our quiet little, the farmhouse transformed into a hub of restless energy as Tyler and I recounted our tale, each retelling of how we stumbled upon the box. It was well past midnight when the storm of questions finally subsided. The box and its mysterious contents had been whisked away as evidence, and we were cautioned against speaking of the matter, as if we had anyone to confide in. Being newcomers in town, our acquaintances were few. I tucked Tyler into bed, his mind buzzing with the thrill of our discovery, while sleep remained a distant companion for me. I found myself seated at the kitchen table, lost in thought. A cold cup of coffee sits before me as I gaze out at the shadowy fields, pondering the mystery of Rachel Crawford. Her name lingers in my mind, familiar yet elusive. The following morning, I ventured into town, resolved to uncover the truth. The local library, modest in size, held a treasure trove of the town's newspaper archives, stretching back through the years. I immersed myself in the microfiche, sifting through countless articles about the Crawford case. Rachel, just 23, had vanished without a trace, her fiancé reporting her missing when she failed to arrive for a significant event. It was the last known sighting of her, her father, Richard Crawford, who said she had gone to town for errands. As I pieced together the fragments of the story, a chill crept over me. Richard Crawford, my uncle's name. The very uncle who had entrusted me with this farm. A growing sense of dread settled in as I recalled my mother mentioning Rachel long ago, a cousin who had vanished before my time. I stepped out of the library, my mind swirling with questions. Had my uncle played a part in Rachel's disappearance? The disappearance had brought me back to a place where I inherited not just a farm, but a shadowy family secret. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a police car waiting, its presence heavy in the stillness. Detective Reeves, the lead investigator, stood there, her demeanor serious. "Mr. Bennett," she said as I stepped out of my truck, "we need to talk." We settled at the kitchen table, the very one where I had spent a restless night. Without delay, Detective Reeves got to the point. "We've identified the DNA on some of the items in the box," she stated, her gaze piercing through the air. "It matches Rachel Crawford. We're treating this as a..." In the dim light of the room, a sense of unease lingered in the air as I nodded, unable to find my voice. "Mr. Bennett," I began, my heart racing. "I must ask, did you have any knowledge of this before you stumbled upon that box?" I shook my head vigorously, the truth spilling from my lips. "No, absolutely not. I inherited this farm from my uncle just 6 months ago. I never even had the chance to meet him." Her eyebrow arched in curiosity. "Your uncle?" I inhaled deeply, the weight of the revelation settling in. "Richard Crawford, Rachel's father." Detective Reeves leaned back, a look of surprise crossing his face. "You're related to the Crawfords?" I recounted the fragments of history I had unearthed at the library, the connection I had only just begun to grasp, as the shadows danced around us, listening intently to my tale. As the detective's mind whirred with thoughts, she turned to Mr. C and said, "I'm going to be straight with you." Her voice was steady, yet the weight of her words hung in the air. "This complicates things. We're going to need to do a thorough search of the property, and I'm afraid you and your son might need to find somewhere else to stay for a while." I nodded, feeling a sense of numbness wash over me. "Of course, whatever you need." The following weeks unfolded like a dark tale. The farm transformed into a crime scene, with police and forensic teams meticulously examining every corner. Tyler and I found ourselves in a motel in town, watching the world outside through a veil of uncertainty. From a distance, our new home was dismantled in the quest for answers. The tale soon captured the attention of local news, and before long, it had spread across the nation. Our once peaceful town became a hub for reporters and true crime aficionados, all eager to uncover the enigma of the mysterious box, the story of Rachel Crawford, and the farmer burdened with a decades-old secret. I attempted to shield Tyler from the harsh realities, but it proved impossible to conceal everything. He was old enough to grasp the essence of the unfolding drama, and what had begun as innocent curiosity about solving a mystery had slowly transformed into something far more unsettling. A deeper, more somber understanding of the reality we were facing settled in. It was Tyler who finally voiced the question I had been dreading. "Dad, do you think Uncle Richard did it? Do you think he killed Rachel?" I pulled him close, wishing I had a better answer. "I don't know, buddy. I really don't know." As the investigation dragged on, more details began to surface. Old case files were reopened, witnesses were re-interviewed, and the picture that emerged was a sad one. Rachel had wanted to leave the farm to start a life with her fiancé, but Richard Crawford had opposed the marriage. The thought of Rachel, hoping she would choose to stay and assist with the family business. Yet, there was no definitive proof, no confession. Only a web of circumstantial evidence and a family fractured by hidden truths and doubt. After nearly 2 months, we were finally permitted to return to the farm. The police had uncovered no further evidence, and although the investigation lingered, they had no grounds to keep us away from our home. The farm felt transformed, as if every creaking floorboard and every rustle in the fields carried the weight of long-buried secrets. I found myself steering clear of those thoughts. The spot where we discovered the box seemed to hold a lingering presence, as if Rachel's spirit might still be nearby. As we returned to our daily lives, an unsettling sensation clung to us, a reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. The farm, once envisioned as our new beginning, now felt overshadowed by the whispers of history. Yet we remained, not only because we had nowhere else to turn, but also out of a sense of duty to Rachel, to unveil the truth and illuminate her story after so many years of quiet. I wonder if we will ever find the answers we seek. I cannot say for certain what transpired with Rachel Crawford, yet her tale, along with the mysteries of this farm, has woven itself into the fabric of our lives. We will find a way to coexist with these shadows, honoring her memory as we carve out our own future on this land. Each time I grasp a shovel, I am compelled to ponder what other secrets lie hidden beneath our feet, and whether some truths are best left undisturbed. The first glimpse of the blue sedan elicited no reaction, but by the third sighting, my palms began to sweat against the steering wheel, and by the fifth, I was fighting the urge to scream. It had begun as a delightful road trip, a chance for Olivia and me to mend the frayed threads of our relationship. We had carefully charted a course from New York to California, marking quirky roadside attractions and scenic viewpoints to savor along the way. Yet, just 3 days in, our carefree adventure had morphed into something unsettling. It was at a gas station just outside of Chicago that I first spotted the car. A nondescript blue sedan, likely a Toyota or Honda, its tinted windows obscuring the driver from view. As I stood there, an inexplicable chill crept over me. We filled up our tank, and I noticed a car pull into the pump across from us. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at that moment. But then, 2 hours later, we stopped for lunch at a diner in the middle of nowhere, and there it was again, parked just a few spaces down. I nudged Olivia, nodding towards the car. Is it just me? Or did we see that Andrew's car at the gas station? She squinted and shrugged. Maybe it's a pretty common car. Probably just a coincidence. I wanted to believe her, but a nagging feeling settled in my gut as we ate our burgers, and I found myself glancing over more often than I intended. Out the window, I half expected to see someone watching us, but the car just sat there, silent and empty. We hit the road again, and for a while, I managed to relax. We sang along to our road trip playlist, played silly car games, and marveled at the changing landscape as we pushed west. But as the sun began to set and we pulled into a small town to find a motel for the night, my blood ran cold. There, in the parking lot of the only motel in town, was the blue sedan. I said, my voice tight. She followed my gaze, and I saw the moment. As the realization settled upon her features, she softly admitted, "Okay, that's a little weird." We hurriedly checked in, our bags in tow, and I took a moment to ensure the door was securely locked. Peering through the curtains, I noticed the blue car still parked outside, its windows shimmering with the neon glow of the motel sign. Should we call the police? Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. I hesitated, contemplating the absurdity of our situation. What would we tell them? That we had spotted the Andrew car 3 times in one day? They would surely think we were being paranoid. Thus, we spent a restless night, taking turns keeping watch, the shadows outside growing ever more unsettling. To keep watch, but as dawn broke, the blue car had vanished. I wished to convince myself it was all just a figment of our imagination, that perhaps we had been overly cautious. Yet, as we merged onto the highway, a chill ran through me. There, a few cars behind, was that unmistakable blue silhouette. "We need to lose them," I urged, my grip on the wheel tightening until my knuckles turned a ghostly white. Olivia nodded, her face drained of color. I took the next exit without warning, eliciting a symphony of honks from the other drivers, but the blue car remained steadfast in its pursuit. I veered down side streets, hoping to be unpredictable, my heart racing with each turn. In the stillness of the night, we caught glimpses of our pursuer in the rearview mirror, sometimes there, sometimes not. Yet, like a shadow, they always returned. After an hour of this eerie game, we found ourselves on a desolate stretch of country road, where fields of corn stretched endlessly on either side, interrupted only by the occasional farmhouse or barn. "What do we do now?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could utter a word, something caught my eye, sending a chill down my spine. Up ahead, an old barn loomed by the roadside, its faded red paint peeling under the watchful gaze of the moonlight. Behind it, just barely visible, was a blue sedan. "They're waiting for us," I whispered. Olivia's eyes widened in fear. "Turn around now." I slammed on the brakes, preparing to spin the car around, but it was too late. The blue sedan pulled out from behind the barn, blocking the road ahead. In that very moment, I caught sight of another car in my rearview mirror, cutting off our escape. We were trapped. Time seemed to slow as the driver's door of the blue sedan opened. A figure stepped out, and I felt the world tilt on its axis. No. Olivia's breath was a whisper beside me, a soft reminder of the tension in the air. It couldn't be. Yet there he was, walking toward our car with a grim smile that sent shivers down my spine. Olivia's ex-boyfriend, Mark. Memories surged forth, ones I had tried so hard to bury. I recalled the day Olivia had appeared at my apartment. 6 months prior, bruised and trembling, her tearful confession spilling forth about Mark's possessive nature and his violent outbursts. Together, we had navigated the dark waters of a restraining order, the weeks filled with anxious glances over our shoulders, jumping at every sound. We had dared to believe it was over, that we were safe. But now, as Mark approached the driver's side, the shadows of the past loomed large once more. As I pressed the lock button, I knew it offered little comfort. He leaned closer, his face mere inches from the glass, and with a voice that sent shivers down my spine, he said, "Long time no see." Olivia stood frozen beside me, her expression a portrait of terror. I grasped her hand tightly, trying to convey strength. "What do you want, Mark?" I called out, striving to keep my voice steady. His smile widened unnaturally, revealing too many teeth. "I want what's mine," he replied, his gaze fixed on Olivia. "She's not yours," I retorted, my voice firm despite the fear that gripped me. "She never was." His face was shadowed, and he spoke with an air of menace. "You don't know anything about us, about what we had." "I know enough," I replied, my voice steady. "I know you're breaking the restraining order just by being here." He let out a laugh, a harsh and humorless sound. "You think I care about some piece of paper? You think that can keep me away from her?" I felt Olivia trembling beside me, a palpable fear in the air. I knew I had to do something, had to find a way to get us out of this situation. But how? That's when I noticed something. The car behind us, the one that had been following us earlier, was unfamiliar, and the driver was a stranger. The driver appeared hesitant, and a notion began to take shape in my mind. A desperate, perhaps foolish notion, but it was all we had. "Olivia," I whispered, keeping my gaze fixed on Mark. "When I say go, I need you to duck down. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. I took a deep breath. Then, in one swift motion, I turned the key in the ignition and slammed the car into reverse. "Go," I yelled. Olivia ducked, and I floored it. Our car shot backward, straight toward the vehicle behind us. At the last moment, I caught a glimpse of the driver's eyes widening in panic. With a sudden swerve, we narrowly avoided a collision. Mark shouted in anger as he ran towards us, but I was already shifting into drive, cutting the wheel hard. We fishtailed onto the shoulder, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. For a heart-stopping moment, I feared we might flip, but then the tires caught and we shot forward. I didn't dare look back. I just drove, pushing our car to its limits. Olivia sat up slowly, her face pale. "Are they following us?" I asked, not daring to take my eyes off the road. She turned in her seat, peering out the back window. It was a restless journey, one that stretched on for hours as we took winding paths, steering clear of the main roads. Each car that passed sent a shiver down our spines, and every stop for gas turned into a frantic search of our surroundings. The clock had long since passed midnight when we finally stumbled upon a small motel in an unfamiliar town. We paid in cash, the weight of our exhaustion pulling us down as we collapsed onto the bed, hearts still racing. "How did he find us?" Olivia whispered into the enveloping darkness. I shook my head, though she could not see my response. "Perhaps he found a way into your phone or something similar. We'll get new ones tomorrow." She fell silent for a long moment. "I'm so sorry," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "This is all my fault. I've ruined everything." I turned to her, pulling her close. "Hey, no, this is not your fault. None of this is your fault. It's all on him." She buried her face in my shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. I held her tightly, my mind racing. What were we going to do now? We couldn't go home. Mark knew where we lived, where we worked. We couldn't. As we continued our journey, I sensed he had been trailing us. But how much longer could he maintain this pursuit? With the first light of dawn gently filtering through the curtains, a thought crystallized in my mind. "We're going to disappear," I declared. Olivia turned to me, her eyes weary and swollen. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean, we will become different people, new names, new identities. We'll find a place he would never think to search. The idea felt wild, even as it left my lips, but what other option remained? Olivia fell silent, contemplating my words, and then, with a slow breath, she began to respond. She nodded, a calm acceptance in her voice as she said, "Let's do it." With the dawn of a new day, we set about planning our vanishing act. Our road trip transformed into an escape route, guiding us not to California, but toward an entirely new life. Uncertainty lingered in the air. I wondered if we would ever truly escape Mark's shadow, if we would ever stop glancing back in fear. Yet one thing was clear. We were in this together, and together we would navigate the path ahead. The open road lay before us, a tapestry woven with both promise and peril, and we drove on into the unknown. In the quiet moments of reflection, we find ourselves gazing into the uncertain future, leaving the past behind us, if only for a while. Freedom, however fleeting, envelopes us. I remember the last time I laid eyes on Isabella Martinez. Her laughter still echoes in my mind. It was a vivid image, her head thrown back, long dark hair dancing in the golden light of the sunset, the sound of her joy carried away by the gentle sea breeze. Little did I know that would be the final glimpse I would have of her. In less than 12 hours, she would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a creeping sense of dread that loomed ever closer. To swallow us all, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Richard Richardson, and I was a security officer aboard the Northern Star, a luxury cruise ship making its way through the Caribbean. It was my third year on the job, and I thought I'd seen it all. Drunken brawls, petty theft, the occasional medical emergency. Nothing I couldn't handle. But Isabella's disappearance was something else entirely. Started like any other day at sea. I began my shift at 6 a.m. As I made my way through the ship's corridors and public areas, a serene quiet enveloped me. Most passengers were still nestled in their cabins, lost in dreams. Passing by the grand atrium, I caught sight of Isabella, who was just wrapping up her night shift at the reception desk. "Morning, Richard," she said, stifling a yawn. "Anything exciting planned for today?" I shrugged, replying, "Just the usual." She chuckled softly, gathering her belongings. "Oh, I will, but first I'm going to watch the sunrise from my favorite spot on the upper deck. Want to join?" "Join me," I hesitated. Duty called, yet the morning was tranquil. Why not? A breath of fresh air would do me good. We wandered to a hidden nook on deck 16, leaning against the railing as the sky began to brighten. Isabella closed her eyes, inhaling the salty breeze. "I love this," she murmured gently. "No matter how many cruises I work, this never gets old." I observed her from the corner of my eye, captivated by her serene demeanor. Over the past few months, we had forged a friendship, sharing meals in the crew mess and exchanging tales. During our off hours, a moment of revelation washed over me. There was still so much I didn't know about her. "How long have you been working on cruise ships?" I inquired. She opened her eyes, a wistful smile dancing on her lips. 5 years now. It was supposed to be just a gap year thing after college, but I fell in love with it. The travel, the people, the sense of adventure. I nodded, understanding completely. It was the same reason I had stayed with this job, despite the long hours and time away from home. We continued to chat for a while longer, sharing stories under the soft glow of the evening. As the sun gently rose above the horizon, casting brilliant hues of orange and pink across the sky, Isabella let out a soft yawn. "I should really get some sleep," she murmured, turning to Richard with a grateful smile. "Thanks for the company. See you later." I nodded, my gaze lingering on her as she walked away, unaware that it would be the last time I would see her alive. The remainder of my shift drifted by without incident, but as evening fell and the staff gathered for our nightly meeting, an unsettling realization began to settle in. Isabella was missing. As the investigators shared their findings, the mother crumpled, her sobs echoing the weight of the moment. I felt a pull to step forward, to offer solace, yet words seemed inadequate in such sorrow. Eventually, the Northern Star embarked once more, a new face at the reception desk where Isabella once stood. Life aboard resumed, or at least tried to mimic normalcy. But for those of us who had known her, who had searched in vain, who remained with a heart full of unanswered questions, nothing would ever truly be the same. As the cruise line remained anchored, the uncertainty of Isabella's fate hung heavily in the air. Each new port offered a glimmer of hope, a chance that a clue might emerge, that someone might have caught a glimpse of her. Yet, as the months slipped by without any fresh leads, that hope began to wane. In the stillness of the night, I often find myself on deck 16, gazing into the vast, dark sea. Thoughts of Isabella flood my mind, her laughter, her joy in watching the sunrise. I ponder her whereabouts, wondering if she lingers somewhere out there, lost in the shadows of the deep. One cannot help but sense that the ocean harbors truths, cradling its secrets within unfathomable depths. The tale of Isabella Martinez's disappearance lingers, an unsolved mystery that drifts like a ghost story among the cruise ship crews. It serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of our sense of security, how swiftly a life can slip away without a trace. Each time I observe a passenger entering their cabin, or watch the flickering images of a security camera feed, a question lingers in the air. Could it happen again in this floating city of steel and glass, adrift in the vast, indifferent sea? Are any of us truly safe? The Northern Star sails on, carrying its cargo of vacationers and secrets. Somewhere out there, perhaps Isabella is still laughing, her voice carried away by the endless ocean breeze. The first slash in the tent canvas was so perfect, so surgical, it almost looked deliberate. I traced my finger along the edge, feeling the fray of the nylon threads. Whatever had done this wasn't just sharp, it was wickedly so. As the fading daylight filtered through that precise cut, casting long shadows across the abandoned campsite, I couldn't help but feel a chill creeping in. The unsettling sensation lingered, as if we had unwittingly crossed into a realm darker than a mere bare encounter. I am Christopher, and alongside my dear friend Jamie, we have been traversing the Appalachian Trail for the past month. As seasoned backpackers, we are well acquainted with the trials of long-distance hiking. Yet, nothing in our extensive outdoor experiences could have steeled us for the discovery that awaited us in that hidden clearing, nestled deep within the Wyoming wilderness. The day had begun like any other on the trail, as we dismantled our camp at. As dawn broke, we set out with the hope of covering a good 15 miles before nightfall. The weather was perfect, cool and crisp, with just enough breeze to keep the bugs at bay. We made good time, pausing only for a quick lunch and the occasional water break. It was late afternoon when Jimmy spotted the first sign that something was amiss. "Hey, Christopher," he called, pointing to a tree just off the trail. "Check this out." I walked over, squinting at the trunk. There, carved deep into the bark, was a crude symbol, a circle with a jagged line through it. The cuts looked fresh, the exposed wood still. Oozing sap, I muttered, "Never seen a trail marker like that before." Jamie shrugged, "Probably just some kid messing around." We pressed on, but I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The forest seemed quieter than usual, the usual chorus of birdsong and insect buzz oddly muted. I could have sworn I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, always just out of sight when I turned to look. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, we started looking for a suitable campsite. That's when we saw the clearing. It was a perfect little clearing, cradled between two rugged outcroppings, with a gentle stream murmuring nearby. Yet, as we drew closer, it became clear that we were not the first to stumble upon this serene haven. The remnants of a campsite lay before us, suggesting that its occupants had mysteriously vanished in the midst of their stay. A tent stood in the center, its door flap fluttering softly in the breeze. A small cooking pot rested on a makeshift fire pit, the ashes long cold. Backpacks and sleeping bags were strewn about, as if their owners had simply disappeared. In a hurried escape, Jimia and I shared a glance, sensing that something was amiss. Even the most disorganized campers typically managed to pack up before leaving. "Hello," Jamie called out, his voice reverberating through the clearing, met only by the gentle gurgle of the stream and the whisper of leaves above. We moved forward with caution, and that's when I spotted the first slash in the tent, followed by another and yet another. The entire structure was marred by these cuts, each one precise and intentional. "What the hell?" I whispered, peering into the devastated shelter. The interior was a disarray of sleeping bags, shredded and scattered, clothes tossed about haphazardly. A flashlight rested on its side, its beam casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls, illuminating a small notebook. I picked it up, flipping it open to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. "Day 3, still out there. We can hear it moving around the camp at night. The others think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. It's not a bear. It's not anything natural. God help us if it gets in." I showed the notebook to Jamie, observing as the color drained from their face. His face was pale as he urged, "We should go," his voice barely above a whisper. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. There, half hidden beneath a torn sleeping bag, lay a camera. My hand trembled as I picked it up, hoping the battery still had life. It did. The screen flickered to life, revealing the last image taken. My heart nearly stopped. The photo was dark, clearly captured at night, but just at the edge of the frame, illuminated by the flash, was a shape that was almost human, yet not quite. Long, spindly limbs and a face that was more shadow than substance, with eyes that glimmered like a cat's but much larger. I dropped the camera, stumbling backwards, a sense of urgency washing over me. We need to leave now. But as I turned, a chill gripped my heart. The sun had nearly vanished. The forest around us was sinking into twilight, shadows stretching and merging into an impenetrable gloom. Jamie was already gathering his pack. "We can make it back to the trail if we hurry," he said, his voice taut with tension. "We'll hike through the night if we have to." I nodded, grabbing my own backpack. But as I turned to go, a sense of dread lingered in the air. A glint of metal caught my eye, half buried in the soft earth near the fire pit. It was a small silver locket. Without thinking, I scooped it up and tucked it into my pocket. We set off at a brisk pace, trying to retrace our steps in the fading light, but nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. More than once, I could have sworn I heard something moving in the underbrush, always just out of sight. "Do you remember that strange symbol we saw earlier, Jamie?" We panted as we pushed through a particularly dense thicket. "I think I see another one," he whispered. There, carved into a massive oak, was the Andrew circle and line symbol we had spotted before, but this one looked older. The edges of the carving were weathered and covered in moss. "It's probably just a coincidence," I said, not quite believing my own words. "Hey, come on, we need to keep moving." Yet, as we pressed on, more symbols emerged. Some were fresh, while others appeared ancient. They seemed to be guiding us, though to what, I couldn't say. The darkness was nearly complete now, enveloping us in its embrace. Headlamps cast small islands of light in a vast sea of darkness. The forest had fallen utterly silent, save for the crunch of our boots on the fallen leaves and the increasingly ragged sound of our breathing. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jamie froze. "What was that?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that panicking now would only lead us deeper into the unknown. We pressed on, moving as quietly as we could. Yet the sounds persisted, drawing nearer. Branches cracked behind us, and something stirred in the canopy above. Then, just ahead, I noticed a flicker of movement. A figure, tall and unnaturally thin, slipped between two trees. In the fleeting glow of my headlamp, I glimpsed pale, elongated limbs and a face that resembled a dark void, with mere pinpricks of light where eyes ought to be. "Run!" I shouted, all thoughts of stealth vanishing as we plunged through the underbrush, panic propelling us onward, branches whipping at our sides. Our faces were met with roots that seemed to reach out, eager to trip us at every step. The sounds behind us grew louder, a cacophony of inhuman shrieks and growls that echoed through the night. I couldn't tell how long we ran. It felt like both minutes and hours. Then, as if by some miracle, we burst onto a wide gravel road. A park ranger station stood just ahead, its windows glowing with a welcoming light. We staggered toward it, gasping for breath. As we reached the door, I dared to glance back at the forest we had just escaped. There, at the edge of the trees, stood a figure, tall, impossibly thin, and watching us closely. Limbs that appeared elongated for its frame reached out, a hand more claw than human. For a fleeting moment, I believed it would chase us into the light, but then it turned, dissolving back into the shadows of the forest. In mere seconds, it vanished, leaving no evidence of its existence. The rangers, naturally skeptical of our tale, dismissed our experience as mere exhaustion, dehydration, and an overactive imagination. Yet they did send a search party to explore the abandoned campsite. They uncovered nothing. No torn tent, no scattered gear, not even a trace. A faint trace of a campfire lingered in the air, as if the entire scene had simply evaporated. In the days that followed, as Jimia and I recuperated in a nearby town, my thoughts drifted to the silver locket I had hastily pocketed in my moment of panic. When I finally summoned the courage to open it, I discovered a small photograph nestled inside. A smiling family. A mother, a father, and two children, all posed in front of a clearing that seemed oddly familiar. I never reported the locket's discovery. A part of me understood that doing so would only invite more questions. Questions I wasn't certain I wanted to face. Answered Jamie, and we never finished our hike. By unspoken agreement, we packed up and headed home. Our adventure on the Appalachian Trail cut short. We don't talk much about what happened in those woods, but sometimes on dark nights, when the wind whispers through the trees, I find myself thinking about that abandoned campsite, about the thing we saw in the forest. I wonder, with a chill that goes bone deep, if somewhere out there in the deepest, darkest parts of the wilderness, it's thinking about us too, the scream that tore through the cab of. That night, my truck was not of this world. It was as if no human could produce a sound so raw, so primal, that it sent chills coursing through my veins. The source of that sound was the man beside me, the hitchhiker I had picked up just an hour earlier. As his eyes snapped open, glinting in the dashboard lights like those of a wild creature, a wave of dread washed over me. I realized with a sickening certainty that whatever had just transpired, whatever horrors he had witnessed in his dreams, was far from finished. My name is Robert, and I have spent countless nights behind the wheel of my truck. For nearly 20 years, I've traversed the vast stretches of highways across the country, encountering my share of peculiar sights in the solitude of the night. There were ghostly lights flickering in the distance, strange weather phenomena that defied explanation, and even the occasional UFO, especially if I had indulged in a few drinks. Yet, nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the events that unfolded on that moonless night in the desolate expanse of Nevada. It began as a routine haul from Phoenix to Minneapolis, my trailer laden with electronics. The journey was smooth, the miles slipping away beneath my wheels as I glided through the quiet desert night. The radio played softly, a comforting blend of old country melodies and late-night discussions on conspiracy theories and alien abductions. I was cruising through the vastness of Nevada when I spotted him, a solitary figure by the roadside, thumb extended. Normally, I wouldn't entertain the idea of picking up hitchhikers. Too many unsettling tales lingered in my mind. Yet something about this man compelled me to slow my pace. Perhaps it was the lost expression in his eyes or the way he sheltered himself from the biting desert wind. Whatever it was, I found myself pulling over. "Where are you headed?" I called out, as he drew near to anywhere but here. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I should have driven off right then," he murmured. Yet somehow I found myself saying, "Hop in. I'm heading to Minneapolis if that works for you." He settled into the passenger seat, bringing with him the scent of dust and something elusive, something I couldn't quite identify. Up close, he appeared young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with shaggy brown hair and eyes that darted nervously around the cab. "I'm Robert," I said, easing back onto the highway. "Nathan," he replied, his gaze averted. Thank you for the ride." We traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds being the rumble of the engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. I attempted to spark a conversation a few times, but Nathan's replies were little more than monosyllables. Eventually, I let it go, my focus shifting to the road ahead. About an hour later, I noticed Nathan had drifted off to sleep, his head resting against the window. I turned the radio down a notch, not wanting to disturb him. That's when the atmosphere began to shift. It started with a twitch, just a small movement of his hand, followed by a change in his breathing. Breathing became more rapid and shallow, his eyes darting beneath closed lids as if he were trapped in the throes of a vivid nightmare. I hesitated, my heart racing, worried he might be experiencing something far worse. Just as I was about to rouse him, he began to mutter, his words initially too soft to decipher, but soon escalating in intensity. No, please don't let it find me." A chill crept down my spine. His voice was laced with raw, unfiltered terror. "Hey, buddy," I said gently, reaching out to shake his shoulder. "Wake up. You're having a nightmare." But he remained lost in his dark reverie, his body still and tense. As the murmurs escalated, his body began to thrash in the seat, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. "It's coming. Oh God. It's coming. Can't you see it? Can't you see its eyes?" And then he let out a scream that sent a chill down my spine, nearly causing me to veer off the road. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, reflecting the eerie green glow of the dashboard like a creature of the night. I managed to pull over, my heart racing in my chest. Nathan, snap out of it." He turned to look at me, but his gaze seemed to be fixed on something beyond, something unseen. It was a night like any other, yet something felt different. Nathan's voice trembled as he spoke, a whisper laced with fear. "Oh God, Robert, it followed me," he said, his breath hitching. I could see the tension in his body, the way he shook his head, insisting, "You can't see it, but it's here. It's always here." His eyes flickered around the cab, searching for something unseen. A chill crept up my spine as I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "What followed you, Nathan?" I asked, trying to steady my own racing heart. But before I could grasp the situation, he flung open the passenger door and leapt into the darkness. I cursed under my breath, fumbling with my seat belt, the weight of the night pressing in around us. As he moved through the cold, still desert night, the only sounds were the ticking of the cooling engine and Nathan's ragged breaths. He stood a few feet from the truck, arms wrapped tightly around himself, trembling like a leaf. "Nathan," I said, approaching him slowly, careful not to startle him like a spooked animal. "What's going on? What do you think is following you?" He turned to me, his face pale in the truck's headlights. "I don't know what it is," he replied, "but it's been after me for days, ever since I found that thing in the desert." "What thing?" I asked, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. My gut tightened as Nathan reached into his pocket with a trembling hand. He pulled out what appeared to be a small stone, but as he held it up, I realized it was no ordinary rock. It was an artifact, intricately carved with symbols I had never encountered before. In the harsh glare of the headlights, it shimmered and shifted, as if the symbols were alive, dancing before my eyes. "I found this out there," Nathan said, gesturing vaguely at the dark expanse of the desert surrounding us. In some kind of old ruin. I thought it might be worth something. He laughed, a sound that echoed into the night, leaving an unsettling chill in the air. With a heavy heart, I found myself grappling with the unsettling truth that I had unknowingly stirred something from its slumber. What did I wake up? I inquired, though a part of me hesitated, fearing the answer. Nathan's gaze locked onto mine, his eyes wide with a dread that sent chills coursing through my veins. The thing that lives in the spaces between, he whispered. The one that hunts in dreams. It wants this back. He raised the artifact, his hands trembling. And it wants me for taking it. I yearned to dismiss his fears, to assure him that he was merely caught in a nightmare, that no monster lurked in the shadows. Yet, the intensity of his conviction and the raw terror etched across his face held me captive, silencing my doubts. It was impossible to dismiss, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Okay, so why don't we just give it back? Throw that thing away and be done with it? Nathan shook his head frantically. I've tried. It doesn't work like that. It's like it's attached to me now. The only way to get rid of it is to pass it on to someone else, to make them take it. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what he was saying. That's why you were hitchhiking. You were trying to give it to someone else. He nodded, tears streaming down his face.
I'm sorry.
Apologies, but I find myself at a breaking point. The dreams, the visions, they haunt me relentlessly. As I stepped back, the vastness of the desert night enveloped us, amplifying my sense of isolation. Nathan, I can't do this, I pleaded, as he extended the artifact toward me. Desperation etched on his face. Please just take it. You'll understand. For a fleeting moment, the artifact's allure tugged at my resolve, its symbols swirling in an enchanting rhythm. Yet, I shook my head, breaking free from its grasp. No, I whispered, firm in my decision, said firmly, I won't do it, Nathan, but I'll help you. We'll figure this out together. Okay? There's got to be a way to get rid of that thing without passing it on. Nathan stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. Okay, he whispered. Okay, we'll try. We got back in the truck, the artifact safely wrapped in a cloth and stowed in the glove compartment. As we pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The night seemed darker. Shadows stretched deeper, and more than once, I could have sworn I glimpsed something shifting just at the edge of my headlights. Something tall and thin with far too many limbs. I still wonder what became of Nathan after I dropped him off in Reno. He mentioned seeking out an expert, someone who could help him rid himself of the artifact for good. I gave him my number and made him promise to call, to let me know he was all right. Yet, 3 months have passed, and silence lingers. Sometimes, during those long, solitary drives through the desert, I find myself scanning the darkness, hoping for a sign. Side of the road, I often find myself half expecting to see him standing there, thumb out. In those fleeting moments between sleeping and waking, I catch glimpses of shapes in the shadows of my room, tall, twisted figures with far too many eyes. I reassure myself it's merely my imagination, a remnant of that peculiar night. Yet, deep down, I sense the truth. Whatever was hunting Nathan that night, whatever dwelled in his dreams, still lurks out there, patiently waiting, watching. And sometimes, when the night is at its darkest and the road stretches endlessly before me, I cannot shake the feeling that I am not alone. The sensation of being observed enveloped me as the leather-bound journal fell open in my hands, its yellowed pages exhaling a musty cloud of dust and decay. Initially, I dismissed it as yet another relic from the farm's extensive history, perhaps a record of crop yields or livestock lineages. However, as my gaze traversed the faded, spidery handwriting, my heart quickened. This was no ordinary farm ledger. The phrases human subject and genetic manipulation leapt out at me, and I began to comprehend, with a chilling sense of dread, that I had uncovered something far more sinister than I had anticipated. I could have imagined. Little did I know, this discovery would plunge me into a nightmare that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the quiet rural world around me. My name's Andrew, and I'd only been working at Oak Ridge Valley Farm for about a month when I found the journal. Fresh out of college with an agriculture degree and dreams of someday owning my own farm, I jumped at the chance to work as a farmhand for old Mr. Harrison. The pay wasn't great, but the experience was invaluable, and there was something enchanting about the sprawling, slightly run-down property, with its weathered barns and endless fields. Mr. Harrison, a quiet man, gruff yet fair, lived alone in the big farmhouse, his wife long gone and his children having moved away to the city. He rarely spoke of the farm's history, simply assigning me my daily tasks and leaving me to my work. My days were spent mending fences, tending to the small herd of cattle, and assisting with the planting and harvesting of crops. It was a hot, sticky afternoon in late July when Mr. Harrison asked me to clear out one of the old. For years, he had grumbled about it, the barn looming large in his mind. "Might as well put you to use on it," he said, as if the task were a rite of passage. I was to gather anything that seemed worth keeping and send the rest to the burn pile. The barn was a vast, shadowy space, its cool interior a welcome relief from the sweltering heat outside. Dust motes danced lazily in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through the weathered boards, creating an ethereal glow. The air was thick with the scent of old hay mingled with something chemical, a smell that lingered just out of reach of my memory. I began in one corner, sifting through piles of rusted remnants, each piece a whisper of the past. Amidst the farm equipment, moldering sacks of feed, and broken furniture, the work felt monotonous, and my thoughts began to drift as I moved item after item to the ever-growing pile outside. It was then that I noticed a loose floorboard, a detail I might have overlooked entirely if my boot hadn't caught on its edge, nearly sending me sprawling. Intrigued, I knelt down to examine it. The board shifted easily beneath my hands, and as I lifted it, I discovered a small space underneath, just big enough to conceal something. There, wrapped in oilcloth, was a journal surprisingly well preserved. Preserved in its hidden place, I carefully pulled it out, casting a glance over my shoulder, a twinge of guilt creeping in, though I knew Mr. Harrison was off in the fields. It felt invasive to delve into someone else's private thoughts, yet my curiosity proved too strong to resist. As I began to read, that curiosity swiftly morphed into confusion, and then into a chilling sense of horror. The journal belonged to Dr. Elliot Harrison, dated 1962, Mr. Harrison's father, I realized. But this was no ordinary farmer. The pages revealed intricate scientific experiments, far beyond anything I had encountered in my own studies. In the quiet corners of academia, Dr. Harrison penned his thoughts on agriculture courses, weaving tales of his endeavors to cultivate hardier, more productive livestock through the delicate art of genetic manipulation. Yet, his curiosity did not rest solely with animals. His notes hinted at human subjects, with vague references to volunteers from the local asylum. As I turned the pages, my hands trembled, revealing the unsettling descriptions of failed experiments. Creatures caught in a liminal space, neither fully human nor entirely animal. The sketches, grotesque and haunting, stirred a deep unease within me, and through it all, a palpable sense of the doctor's obsession loomed, a conviction that he was on the brink of something extraordinary, yet profoundly unsettling. On the brink of a discovery that promised to transform agriculture and alter the course of history, the last entry, penned in 1968, stood apart. The handwriting trembled, almost desperate. It read, "It's done. The experiment was a success. But at what cost?" They lurked now, concealed in the woods and fields, their presence felt in the night as they scratched at the walls. "God forgive me for what I've created," I whispered, snapping the journal shut, my heart racing. Surely this had to be some twisted joke, or perhaps the musings of a madman. There was no way any of this could be real, yet, as I attempted to make sense of it all, Memories of peculiar happenings on the farm began to resurface. The strange sounds I had attributed to wildlife, the parts of the property Mr. Harrison had cautioned me to steer clear of, and the way the cattle occasionally appeared unsettled by an unseen presence. I tucked the journal away, my thoughts swirling in a tempest. I felt an urgent need to escape the confines of the barn, to breathe in the fresh air and find clarity. Stepping outside, my eyes adjusting to the bright sunlight, I nearly collided with Mr. Harrison. As he inquired about the clutter I had gathered, I simply nodded, unable to find my voice. A question lingered in the air. Did he know about the journal, about his father's actions? Mr. Harrison's gaze sharpened, as if he could sense the tension within me. "Everything all right, Andrew? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a response. "I'm fine, just, it's hot in there. Needed some air." He nodded slowly, a hint of understanding in his eyes. "Well, don't work too hard. Come on up to the house when you're done. I'll fix us some dinner." I watched him retreat, my thoughts swirling like shadows in the dim light. As I pondered the gruff old man I had known, I found myself grappling with the unsettling history that had come to light. Was he merely carrying on his father's legacy, or had he, too, been ensnared in its shadows? That night, in the small apartment above the garage that Mr. Harrison had kindly offered me, sleep eluded me. Each creak of the aging building and every whisper of the wind through the fields heightened my unease. My thoughts kept returning to the journal, to the strange creatures Dr. Harrison had described. Were they still lurking out there after all these years? Suddenly, a noise broke the stillness outside, sending a chill down my spine. The sound from the window jolted me awake, a strange guttural noise that sent shivers down my spine. My heart raced as I cautiously approached the window, peering into the enveloping darkness. At first, all seemed still, but then something stirred in the field beyond the barn. It was large and certainly not a cow. Its movements were erratic, almost otherworldly. Then, it turned, and in the pale moonlight, I caught a fleeting glimpse of its face. I stumbled back from the window, stifling a scream. What I had seen was not human, yet it was not entirely of this world either. An air of unease, as if he sensed something lurking just beyond the trees. It was an unsettling feeling, one that crept into my thoughts like a shadow. Each night, I found myself drawn to the window, peering into the darkness, half expecting to see something watching back. The world outside felt different, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the familiar sounds of the night took on a new tone, and I could not shake the feeling that something was waiting for me in the dark. With a troubled expression, I contemplated the idea of leaving, of packing my belongings and escaping Oak Ridge Valley Farm. Yet, something kept me rooted in place. Perhaps it was curiosity or a lingering sense of responsibility. Whatever Dr. Harrison had unleashed, whatever he had crafted, still lingered in the shadows, and I felt a flicker of hope that I might be able to confront it. Thus, I embarked on my own investigations, treading carefully at first. I revisited the journal, making notes, striving to grasp the science behind Dr. Harrison's experiments. I ventured into the far reaches of the property, seeking answers in the quiet darkness that enveloped it. The places Mr. Harrison had advised me to steer clear of, I began to unravel the unsettling truth. The experiments had not ceased with Dr. Harrison's final journal entry. They had persisted, handed down through generations. Mr. Harrison was not merely cognizant of his father's actions. He was striving to amend them. Everything converged on a tempestuous night in late August when I was jolted awake by the shattering of glass and Mr. Harrison's frantic cries. I dashed toward the farmhouse, the rain whipping against my face. As I approached, I found the front door splintered and hanging off its hinges. Inside, chaos reigned. Furniture overturned, claw marks scoring the walls. In the center of the living room stood Mr. Harrison, facing a creature that defied description, part human, part animal. Its body a patchwork of mismatched parts, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence. "Andrew," Mr. Harrison yelled when he saw me. My gaze fell upon the mantel, where a large syringe filled with a glowing blue liquid caught my eye. Without thinking, I grabbed it and tossed it into the fray. With a fluid motion, Mr. Harrison caught the object and drove it into the creature's neck. A howl erupted from the thing, chilling my very bones. It thrashed for a moment, then fell to the ground, its form shifting and twisting before my eyes. In mere moments, all that remained was an unconscious man, strikingly human in appearance. Mr. Harrison sank to his knees, his face etched with exhaustion and relief. "It's over," he murmured. "It's finally over." In the days that followed, Mr. Harrison shared with me the tale of how his father's experiments had given rise to this nightmare. A handful of hybrid creatures had concealed themselves in the woods for decades, occasionally emerging to instill fear upon the farm. He had dedicated his life to seeking a cure, a means to undo the horrors his father had unleashed. The man we had captured that night was the last of his kind. With him cured, the long nightmare seemed to draw to a close. Yet, the burden of it all, the dark legacy of Oak Ridge Valley Farm, would linger in my heart forever. I continue to tend to the farm alongside Mr. Harrison, and we never speak of that night to anyone. Who would believe us? But sometimes, on those still, quiet nights, when the world holds its breath, memories creep back in. The wind whispers softly through the cornfields, and I find myself scanning the tree line, pondering whether we have truly uncovered all that lies hidden. It brings to mind the delicate balance between scientific progress and the act of playing God, a line that can be crossed so easily, even with the best of intentions. The secrets of Oak Ridge Valley Farm are now buried, as they ought to be, yet the lessons of responsibility and the unforeseen consequences of our actions will linger in my thoughts. From now on, I shall never view a quiet rural farm in quite the same way. Once more, the footprints ceased abruptly in the heart of the field, as if their owner had simply melted away into the night. I stood there, flashlight gripped tightly, my thoughts wrestling with the strange scene before me. 2 decades on the force, and I had never faced anything quite like this. The car remained idling, keys dangling in the ignition, the driver's belongings left undisturbed. It felt as though the driver had merely stepped out for a fleeting moment, only to vanish without a trace. Little did I realize that this seemingly ordinary call would unravel into a labyrinth of the inexplicable. Events and unsolved mysteries linger in the shadows, ready to haunt for years to come. My name is Rachel Anderson, and I've spent 2 decades as a state trooper in Nevada. I believed I had witnessed everything: high-speed chases, horrific accidents, and even the occasional UFO sighting from someone who had wandered too long under the desert sun. Yet, nothing could have steeled me for the events of that night on a desolate stretch of Interstate 80, nestled in the heart of what locals refer to as the loneliest road in America. It began like any other night shift. As I glided down the highway, more tumbleweed than traffic accompanied me, when the call came in. A passing motorist had reported an abandoned vehicle on the roadside, its hazard lights flickering like a warning beacon. It was standard procedure to check it out, call a tow if needed, and continue on my way. As I pulled up behind the vehicle, a late model sedan, nothing particularly striking about it, I sensed something unusual. The engine was still running. I approached with caution, one hand resting on my holster out of habit. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, yet there was no sign of life inside. As I signaled to the driver, I directed my flashlight into the interior, revealing an ordinary scene. A half-empty water bottle nestled in the cup holder, a phone quietly charging on the dashboard, and a duffel bag resting in the back seat. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to suggest anything amiss. "Hello," I called out, my voice cutting through the stillness as I swept my flashlight across the surrounding area. "Highway patrol," only the soft whisper of the desert wind replied. It was then that I noticed the footprints, a solitary set leading away from the driver's side door and into the vast field beyond. Beside the highway, the tracks were distinct and deliberate, not the erratic marks of someone lost or hurt. I reported my findings and set off to trace the path. The field lay mostly bare, with only scrub brush and hard-packed earth, making the trail easy to spot in the glow of my flashlight. I anticipated discovering the driver, perhaps taking a moment behind a bush or having strayed off in bewilderment. Yet, as I ventured deeper, I found only silence. The footprints vanished suddenly, about 50 yards into the field. One moment they were vivid, and the next they simply ceased to exist. Next, there was nothing but the undisturbed earth stretching out into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, my mind struggling to comprehend what lay before me. People don't simply vanish. There had to be an explanation. I searched the area thoroughly, widening my circle, looking for any sign of disturbance. Nothing. No scuff marks to indicate someone had jumped or been lifted. No signs of a struggle. Just those footprints ending in the middle of nowhere. By the time backup arrived, I was sweating despite the cool night air. My colleague Nathan took one look at my face and sensed that something was amiss. "What have we got, Rachel?" he inquired, his hand instinctively drifting to his holster. I detailed the situation, gesturing toward the car and the footprints, the impossible ending. He trailed behind me into the field, his bewilderment deepening with each step. "This is weird," he finally remarked, pausing at the end of the trail. "Really weird." We summoned forensics and cordoned off the area. The next few hours blurred into a flurry of activity, photographing the scene, taking casts of the footprints, and searching the vehicle. In the quiet hours of dawn, a mystery unfolded. Thomas Richardson, a 37-year-old software engineer from Denver, had been driving to visit his family when he inexplicably vanished. His loved ones, contacted in the wake of his disappearance, revealed they had not heard from him. There was no history of mental illness or erratic behavior to suggest a reason for his sudden absence. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the field, the scene was eerily still. A running car stood abandoned, and a set of footprints led into the unknown. In the days that followed, the search intensified. Search parties scoured the area, while helicopters equipped with thermal imaging swept the skies. Yet the enigma of Thomas Richardson remained unsolved, shrouded in an unsettling silence. Imagining the scene, we find ourselves sifting through the remnants of Thomas's life. His phone records, bank statements, and internet history were examined with meticulous care. Yet the mystery deepened. Missing persons bulletins spread across multiple states, but still, not a single clue emerged about Thomas Richardson's fate. Theories flourished, each more bizarre than the last. Some whispered of abduction by criminals, others spoke of a cult, or even extraterrestrial involvement. There were murmurs of a staged disappearance, secret government experiments, and portals to other dimensions. Amidst this swirling chaos, I sought to remain anchored to reality. As I delved deeper into the case, the peculiarities began to multiply. A week after Thomas's disappearance, an anonymous tip came my way. The caller, with a quivering voice altered by a modulator, urged me to investigate something known as the Shadow Highway. Initially, I brushed it off as yet another eccentric lead. Yet the urgency in the caller's tone lingered in my mind. That night, sleep eluded me, and I found myself immersed in research. What I uncovered sent a shiver down my spine. The Shadow Highway was not merely a single road, but rather, across various states and even countries, there have been unsettling reports of lonely stretches of road where individuals have mysteriously vanished without a trace, often leaving their vehicles in perfect working order. In some instances, witnesses spoke of strange lights flickering in the sky, while others described an eerie sensation of lost time, as if the world around them was shifting and changing. The deeper I delved into these accounts, the more I uncovered cases that echoed Thomas's story. A woman in Alaska, for instance, whose car was found running, her purse still resting on the seat, with footprints leading into the untouched snow. In the vast expanse of the Australian outback, a truck driver vanished without a trace during what was supposed to be a routine delivery. His rig was found idling quietly on the side of the highway, a haunting sight that sparked my curiosity. I began to compile a file, meticulously cross-referencing similar cases, searching for patterns in the darkness. Most of these disappearances unfolded under the cover of night, often in remote areas where the silence was palpable. Witnesses spoke of strange occurrences, radios cutting out, phones losing signal, just moments before someone would disappear. As I delved deeper into this unsettling research during my off-duty hours, I could feel a change within myself. An unsettling jumpiness began to creep in, as if the shadows themselves were watching me. Every time I patrolled that stretch of Interstate 80, a sense of unease washed over me. I found myself scanning the horizon, half expecting to catch a glimpse of strange lights or shadowy figures lurking in the distance. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Nathan, in particular, confronted me one night over coffee at the station. "Rachel, you've got to let this go," he said, concern etched in his eyes. "The Richardson case is cold. It's eating you up." I wanted to share everything about the shadow highway and the patterns I had uncovered, but deep down, I knew how it would sound. I would be taken off active duty and sent to psych evaluation, so I kept my silence. I nodded and promised myself some time to clear my mind, yet the pull was too strong. The very next night, I found myself back on Interstate 80, off duty, my personal vehicle filled with cameras and scanning equipment borrowed from a friend in the UFO watching community. I wasn't sure what I hoped to uncover. Perhaps proof, or something that could bring clarity to the chaos, a way to explain the unexplainable. But what awaited me was something entirely different. Just after midnight, my radio began to crackle with static, and at first, I thought, nothing of it. Reception was spotty out here at the best of times. But then I noticed the lights on my dashboard flickering. My headlights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. Heart pounding, I pulled over to the side of the road. This was it, the electronic interference reported in other cases. I grabbed my camera, ready to document whatever came next. That's when I saw it. A light in the field beside the highway. Not a flashlight or a vehicle headlight, but something different. It pulsed with a soft bluish glow, hovering about 6 feet off the ground. As I stepped out of my car, the camera forgotten in my hand, the light ahead seemed to beckon, drawing me closer. I took one step, then another. In the recesses of my mind, a voice urged me to stop, to retreat to the safety of my vehicle, to drive away as swiftly as possible. Yet, this warning was drowned out by an overpowering sense of curiosity, a deep longing to uncover the source of the light. I walked on, though I couldn't tell how long it had been. Time had lost its meaning. The light remained just ahead, always just out of reach, while I was vaguely aware of the world around me. My feet brushed against the tall grass, a soft scraping sound against my legs, and then, without warning, the light vanished. I blinked, disoriented, as the spell of the moment broke. There I stood, in the middle of a vast field, with no recollection of how far I had wandered. Turning back toward the highway, I expected to see the comforting glow of my car's headlights, but there was nothing. No car, no highway, just the endless stretch of desert, silvered under the glow of a moon I couldn't recall seeing before. Panic began to creep in as I spun around, searching for my bearings. That's when I noticed them, footprints in the sand. Dirt marked my footprints leading to where I stood, and beyond them, another set of prints. Familiar prints I had seen once before, ended abruptly in the middle of nowhere. I stood there, my mind reeling as the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. I understood now. I was no longer the investigator. I had become part of the mystery. As the first light of dawn began to creep across the horizon, I made a decision. I would follow those footprints, Thomas Richardson's footprints, whatever had happened to him, whatever lay ahead. Beyond that impossible ending lay a mystery waiting to unfold. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for whatever lay ahead, and stepped forward, leaving my own trail of footprints in the desert sand. Somewhere in the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert, an abandoned car sat with its engine still running, a set of footprints leading into the unknown. The shadow highway had claimed another victim, and I had become just another unsolved mystery on the loneliest road in America. The first footprint emerged like a phantom in the morning dew. There it stood, a figure unmistakably human yet far too large to belong to any of us. I found myself staring, my coffee mug forgotten in my hand, as the rising sun cast long shadows across our ravaged campsite. Our food lay scattered, tents slashed, and an eerie silence enveloped the area where the cheerful songs of birds should have filled the air. But it was that single massive footprint that sent a chill creeping down my spine. Whatever had visited us in the night was no ordinary creature, and a sickening feeling settled in my gut, whispering that it wasn't finished with us yet. My name's Christopher, and this camping trip, well, it was unlike any other. Was meant to be a moment for my family to reconnect, a respite from the relentless hum of technology, a chance to remember the simple joy of being together. My wife Rachel, our 2 children Lily and Max, and I had spent months planning this escape to Evergreen Ridge Campsite, a secluded spot hidden deep within the mountains. We arrived late yesterday afternoon, the children buzzing with excitement as we set up our tents and gathered wood for the fire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we roasted marshmallows and shared ghost stories, our laughter weaving through the trees, creating a tapestry of warmth against the encroaching night. It felt perfect, as if we had finally discovered a way to pause the hectic pace of our lives and simply breathe. If only I had known then how swiftly our idyllic retreat would transform into a nightmare. The first sign that something was amiss came in the middle of the night. I awoke to the sound of rustling outside our tent, far too loud to be a raccoon or any of the small wildlife we had been warned about. Grabbing my flashlight, I unzipped the tent flap and peered out, the beam of light catching a flash of movement at the edge of our surroundings. At the campsite, something large slipped behind a tree, too swift for me to discern its form. My heart raced as I hurriedly zipped the tent shut, lying awake for hours, attuned to the sounds of something substantial prowling around our camp. When dawn broke, the full reality of the disturbance revealed itself. Our cooler lay overturned, its contents strewn across the ground, claw marks etched into the sides of our tents. And there, in a patch of bare earth, was that enormous footprint. "Christopher, what's going on?" Rachel's voice jolted me from my daze. Stood in the entrance of our tent, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. I tried to keep my voice calm for her sake. "Looks like we had a visitor last night, probably a bear." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Bears didn't leave footprints like that. As Rachel woke the kids and we began to clean up the mess, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest around us seemed too quiet, the shadows between the trees too deep. "Dad, can we go home now?" Lily asked, her voice small and frightened. Clutching her stuffed rabbit, I felt an overwhelming urge to agree, to gather our belongings and retreat to the comforting embrace of civilization. Yet, as I turned the key in the ignition, a chill coursed through me. The engine sputtered and fell silent, stubbornly refusing to respond no matter how many attempts I made. "It's okay," I reassured my family, striving to exude a confidence that was slipping away. "Probably just a dead battery. I'll hike down to the ranger station and get help." But Rachel seized my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't go out there alone. What if whatever did this is still out there?" I hesitated, for she was right, of course. But what choice did we have? In the end, we decided to stick together. We packed some supplies and began our journey down the trail toward the ranger station. It was only 5 miles, an easy hike under normal circumstances. Yet, with every snapping twig and rustle in the underbrush, our nerves frayed a little more. We were about halfway there when Max spotted it. Another footprint, this one pressed into a patch of mud beside the trail. It was even larger than the first and appeared fresher. "It's following us," Rachel whispered, pulling the kids close. I wanted to reassure her, to say it was probably just coincidence, but the words stuck in my throat. 'Cause deep down, I knew she was right. We picked up our pace, the kids whimpering as branches scratched at their arms and legs. The sun was starting to set, the forest growing darker by the minute, and still the ranger station seemed no closer. That's when we heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Lily screamed, and Max burst into tears. With tears streaming down my face, I scooped up Lily while Rachel grasped Max's hand. We raced down the trail, panic propelling us forward. Branches lashed at our faces, and roots seemed to reach out, eager to trip us at every turn. The growl behind us grew louder, closer. I dared to glance back, only to wish I hadn't. Something massive and dark moved through the trees, its glowing eyes and sharp teeth flashing before I turned away, pushing myself to run faster than I ever had before. We stumbled into a small clearing, breathless and wide-eyed. Gasping for breath, we stumbled upon a cabin. No, not the ranger station we had been aiming for, but in that moment, it felt like salvation. Without a second thought, we raced for the door, hoping it would be unlocked. The handle turned under my grip, and we tumbled inside, slamming the door behind us. For a long moment, we stood there, chests heaving, listening to the sounds of something large circling the cabin. Scratching noises came from the walls, and a low, frustrated growl echoed through the night. "What is it, Daddy?" Lily whispered. She whimpered, burying her face in my shoulder. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, gently stroking her hair. "But we're safe in here. It can't get us." As our eyes adjusted to the gloom, we began to take in our surroundings. The cabin was small, just one room with a fireplace, a few pieces of rustic furniture, and shelves lined with canned goods and supplies. It resembled some kind of emergency shelter or hunting cabin. Rachel found some lanterns and lit them, casting a warm glow around the room as the kids huddled together. On the threadbare couch, she leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Christopher, what are we going to do?" There was a tremor in her words, a hint of fear. "What if it doesn't leave?" I inhaled deeply, striving to maintain a sense of calm. "We have shelter, and it seems there's enough food to last us for a while. We'll just wait it out. Someone is bound to come looking for us eventually." Yet, as the night stretched on, that initial confidence began to fade. The creature outside showed no signs of retreating. We could hear it prowling around the cabin, testing the walls and door from time to time. It let out a roar that made the windows rattle. The children finally succumbed to an uneasy sleep, worn out from the day's terror. Rachel and I took turns keeping watch, our eyes scanning the darkness outside. During my watch, in the deepest hours of the night, I saw it clearly for the first time. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting a silvery light over the clearing in front of the cabin. There, at the edge of the trees, stood a creature that defied existence. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a body that seemed... It was a curious sight, a patchwork of animal parts, thick fur cloaking most of its form, yet revealing patches of scales and what appeared to be feathers. Its face, a nightmarish fusion of bear and something almost human, bore eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow in the moonlight. As I stood there, frozen in horror, those glowing eyes turned directly towards me. And then, impossibly, it smiled, exposing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so fiercely I feared it might burst from my chest. Surely this couldn't be real. Such creatures could not exist. It was as if the world outside had vanished, yet the growl that echoed through the night was undeniably present. Time seemed to slip away in that cabin. Days melded into one another, distinguished only by the sun's ascent and descent, and the ever-watchful creature lurking beyond. We managed our food supplies with caution, aware that we might be in for an extended stay. The children, surprisingly, found ways to turn our confinement into a playful adventure. But I could sense the weight of anxiety pressing down on Rachel, the unrelenting fear slowly taking its toll. On the 5th day, we awoke to an unsettling silence. No growls, no scratching at the walls. With a sense of trepidation, I cautiously peered out the window, and the clearing lay empty before me. We chose to wait another full day, hesitant to venture out. The forest appeared normal once more, with birds singing and small animals scurrying about. Yet, the claw marks on the cabin walls and the massive footprints in the mud served as undeniable proof that our ordeal had been all too real. As we made our way back to our campsite, we half expected to find it in ruins. Instead, we were greeted by park rangers and a search party. And to our surprise, our car had been fixed, as if by some unseen hand. Someone had noticed it sitting abandoned and called it in. We shared a sanitized version of events, explaining that we had gotten lost, found the cabin, and waited out a storm. Who would believe the truth? As we drove home, the kids chattered excitedly about their adventure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had glimpsed something we were never meant to see. A creature lurking in the shadows of the world, defying explanation. We never went camping again, but sometimes on dark nights, when the wind howls outside our safely locked doors, as I reflect on that cabin nestled deep within the woods, a thought lingers in my mind. Could that creature still be wandering the vast expanse of the wilderness, patiently awaiting the next unsuspecting family to cross its path? The wilderness, with its ancient and terrifying secrets, often conceals truths that possess both teeth and claws. The first thing that struck me was the eerie silence aboard a cruise ship bustling with over 3,000 passengers and 1,500 crew members. Silence in such a setting is never a good omen. I found myself standing on the Leo deck, where just hours before, families had filled the air with laughter and joy. As I splashed in the pool, the lively music blared from the speakers, filling the air with joy. But now, all that remained was the soft lapping of waves against the hull and the faint hum of distant engines. I turned slowly in a circle, taking in the sight of abandoned lounge chairs and half-empty cocktails. A chill crept down my spine. Where had everyone gone? Why did the air suddenly feel so different? My name is Emma Richardson, and what should have been a serene Caribbean cruise transformed into a bewildering and unsettling experience. Even now, I find it hard to believe what unfolded before me. The ship lulling me into a peaceful slumber. It was a day like any other, or so I thought. The sun cast a warm glow over the deck, and the laughter of fellow passengers drifted through the air. Yet, as I surrendered to the embrace of sleep, a subtle shift began to weave through the atmosphere, a whisper of something unexplainable. I felt the world around me blur, the edges of reality softening as I drifted deeper into my dreams, unaware of the strange journey that awaited me in the shadows of the night. As the ship gently rocked me into slumber, I awoke to a peculiar light filtering through my porthole. It appeared dimmer, imbued with an unusual bluish hue that I had never encountered before. Disoriented, I reached for my phone, only to find the screen utterly black, completely lifeless despite having been fully charged when I lay down. Frowning, I rose and attempted to use the cabin's phone, but all I heard was a faint buzzing on the line. It was then that I became aware of the silence. No distant laughter echoing from the hallway, no muffled announcements drifting through the PA system, just an unsettling void. A knot of unease began to tighten within me. With a slight flutter in my stomach, I stepped out into the hallway, which lay deserted. The usual bustle of passengers and crew members was conspicuously absent, leaving an unsettling stillness in its wake. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the carpeted floor as I made my way toward the elevator bank. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and lost in the empty corridor. There was no response. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding, a sound that felt wildly out of place in the eerie silence. As I rode up to the Leo deck, I tried to rationalize what was happening. Perhaps there was some sort of emergency drill I had slept through. As I ventured through the eerie silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. They always announced these moments well in advance, and surely someone would have stirred me when the elevator doors opened onto the Leo deck. The full extent of the strangeness enveloped me. The vast open-air deck lay in complete desolation. Lounge chairs stood empty, some adorned with towels and books, as if their owners had merely stepped away for a fleeting moment. The bars were deserted, rows of colorful cocktails left abandoned on their counters. I moved slowly around the deck, my heart racing, and called out, "Hello!" with a voice that echoed into the stillness, louder this time. As I walked the deck, the only response to my presence was the gentle sound of the waves. But then, a chill crept over me. The lifeboats remained untouched, perfectly in place. If an emergency had occurred, surely they would have been launched. I spent the following hours exploring the ship, moving from deck to deck, my unease deepening with each empty room and deserted corridor I discovered. The theater stood eerily still, mid-setup for the evening's performance, while the casino's slot machines blinked quietly in the dim light, casting shadows that danced across the floor. In the dining room, tables were set for a dinner that would never be served. Everywhere I looked, signs of life lingered, yet felt hauntingly interrupted. Half-eaten meals lay abandoned on the buffet. A load of laundry tumbled endlessly in the dryer of an otherwise empty laundromat, and a child's stuffed animal lay forgotten in the middle of a hallway. Despite the thousands of people who should have been on board, I found no trace of them. As night fell, or what I assumed was night, given the deepening of that strange bluish light, I made my way to the bridge, hoping against hope to find something, anything, that would explain this eerie silence. In the stillness of the bridge, a sense of unease settled in, as if the very air held its breath. The ship lay deserted, much like the vast expanse of the sea surrounding it. Yet, amidst the silence, the radar screens flickered to life, casting a faint glow that illuminated our position in the heart of the Caribbean. The navigation systems whispered their soft hums, a reminder that the vessel remained steadfast on its course, guided by unseen hands. I sank into the captain's chair, weariness and dread washing over me like a tide. Questions swirled in my mind. What had transpired? Where had everyone vanished to? And most pressing of all, what was I to do in this eerie solitude? As I lingered in that moment, the weight of the unknown pressed heavily upon me. As I sat there, gazing vacantly at the array of instruments before me, something peculiar drew my attention. The date display on one of the monitors flickered to life, and I blinked, convinced I must be imagining things. But there it was, glowing in eerie green letters, August 13th, 2025. A week had somehow slipped away impossibly since I had laid down for my nap. A laugh escaped me, a high, hysterical sound that reverberated oddly in the empty bridge. This couldn't be real. People didn't simply lose a week of time. Entire ships full of souls didn't just vanish. Yet here I was, caught in this unsettling reality. Days drifted by, each one blending into the next, as if time itself had forgotten its purpose. I wandered the ship, leaving notes in every corner, pleading for a sign, a whisper that I was not alone in this vast emptiness. I reached for every phone, every radio, exploring every possible avenue of communication, but all I encountered was the haunting silence of static. My meals came from the slowly decaying supplies in the ship's enormous kitchen, while I sought refuge in different cabins each night, my sleep fitful and restless. To stave off the creeping madness, I spoke aloud, weaving a narrative of my existence, as if I were the hero of a strange and unsettling tale. On what I believe was the fourth day of my solitude, I noticed the lights. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, unraveling under the weight of isolation. But there they were, distant pinpricks of light on the horizon, growing larger by the minute. A surge of hope filled me. Another ship, perhaps a rescue party. I hurried to the bow, waving my arms and shouting, even though I knew they were still too far away to see or hear me. As the lights drew nearer, I suddenly realized they weren't coming from the sea, but from the sky. My elation transformed into confusion, then settled into a kind of numb acceptance. Of course, why not? After everything else, why shouldn't there be strange lights in the sky? The lights descended slowly, hovering over the ship, beautiful and pulsing with colors I had no names for, casting shimmering reflections on the calm sea. As I watched, A beam of light shot down from the center of the formation, touching the deck just a few feet away from me. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights vanished, and I was no longer alone. The crowd swirled around me, a tapestry of swimsuits and sundresses, while crew members in their crisp uniforms moved with purpose. Confusion hung in the air, voices rising in a cacophony of questions and exclamations. What happened? Where did everyone go? Was I dreaming? I stood frozen, unable to grasp the reality unfolding before my eyes. A man in a captain's uniform approached me, his face etched with concern. "Miss, are you all right? You look pale." I opened my mouth, but no words emerged. How could I possibly explain the unexplainable events of the days that followed? The ship glided back to port, and a tale began to unfold, woven together by the accounts of those aboard. To them, no time had elapsed. One moment they were engaged in their daily routines, and the next, they stood on the deck, bewildered and disoriented. Yet, only I held the memory of the deserted vessel, the long days of solitude, and the eerie lights that danced in the darkness. I alone had endured that unfathomable week. The incident captured the world's attention, as headlines blared about the cruise ship's sudden reappearance after its mysterious vanishing. Experts were called upon, theories were crafted and dismissed, but the truth remained elusive, shrouded in shadows. There were whispers of wormholes, tales of alien abduction, and even a few fringe voices that proposed the idea of mass hallucination or an elaborate hoax. As for me, I shared my account with the authorities and then faded from the public gaze. How could I articulate something that eluded my own understanding? How could I convey the deep-seated loneliness that enveloped me during those days aboard the empty ship, the unsettling feeling of a world just slightly out of tune? Since then, I have never stepped foot on another cruise ship. The mere sight of the ocean now stirs within me a nameless dread. In the stillness of the night, when shadows stretch and the world is hushed, I find myself awakening, heart racing, as if I've been transported back to that desolate ship, adrift in an endless sea of time. The Atlantic majesty holds secrets I cannot grasp. The whereabouts of my companions remain a mystery, and the strange lights that danced above are but whispers of the unknown. Yet, amidst this uncertainty, one truth lingers. Our grasp on reality, on the fabric of time and space, is but a fragile thread. There are forces beyond our understanding, lurking in the depths, waiting for the moment when we might catch a glimpse of their true nature. And sometimes, in those quiet hours, if we listen closely, we might just hear their call. It is indeed unfortunate when we catch a glimpse of the unseen, a fleeting look behind the veil of our familiar world into the vast and unsettling unknown that awaits us. I experienced that glimpse, and it transformed me in ways I could never have anticipated. So, the next time you find yourself aboard a cruise or any vessel, and you feel an unexpected chill, or notice the light shifting ever so subtly, or perhaps find yourself in a space that should be bustling with life yet feels eerily empty, take heed of my tale. Hold on to hope with every ounce of your being that you do not slip through the cracks of time as I once did. For believe me, once you do, there is no turning back. You've encountered a solitude so profound that it changes you, leaving you not quite the same. The scratching began on the first night, a subtle yet persistent sound that might have been tree branches brushing against the cabin's wooden walls, were it not for the eerie stillness enveloping the night. I lay awake, Olivia's steady breathing beside me, as the noise intensified, becoming more intentional. It wasn't until a distinct tapping echoed on the bedroom window that a chill coursed through me, revealing the unsettling truth that something was out there. There wasn't a tree in sight, and it wanted in. My name is Marcus, and what was meant to be a romantic getaway with my girlfriend transformed into a waking nightmare that lingers in my mind. We had been dating for a year, and with both of us overwhelmed by work stress, a week in a secluded cabin seemed like the perfect escape. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just the two of us and the great outdoors. If only we had known what awaited us in those woods. We arrived at the cabin late Friday afternoon, and it was exactly as advertised, a cozy retreat. In a secluded clearing, there stood a two-bedroom log cabin, embraced by the towering pines that whispered secrets of the forest. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the dirt road that led us to this hidden gem was rugged enough to stir doubts in our minds more than once. Yet, as we stepped out of the car, the crisp mountain air and the profound silence enveloped us, washing away our uncertainties. This was precisely the retreat we sought. The cabin's owner, a gruff older man named George, greeted us with the keys in hand. As he guided us through the cabin, I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes flickered nervously, scanning the surroundings as if expecting something just beyond the trees. As we settled into our spot, he shared a few things to keep in mind while we stood on the porch. "Don't go wandering in the woods after dark," he cautioned, his voice steady. "There's plenty of wildlife out there, and it's easy to get turned around. And if you hear any strange noises at night, just ignore them. It's probably just raccoons or something." I nodded, not giving it much thought at the time. Every cabin owner had their own quirks and warnings. "Oh, and one more thing," George added, placing his hand on the door. "Whatever you do, don't open the doors or windows at night, no matter what you hear." "Got it." Before we could inquire about his meaning, he vanished, his truck stirring up dust as it sped down the dirt road. Olivia and I exchanged glances. "Well, that was strange," she said with a nervous laugh. I shrugged it off, thinking he was probably just trying to spook the city folk. "Come on, let's unpack." The rest of the day unfolded perfectly. We hiked a nearby trail, cooked dinner on the old wood stove, and spent the evening nestled on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in a sky untouched by light pollution. It wasn't until we were preparing for bed that I noticed the scratches adorned the inside of the doors and framed the windows, long, deep gouges in the wood, as if something with very sharp claws had left its mark. Come look at this," I called out. She approached, frowning as her fingers traced the lines. "Weird. You think a bear tried to get in or something?" "Maybe," I replied, though the nature of the scratches sent a chill down my spine. They felt too deliberate, too purposeful. We settled into bed, joking about ghost bears to lighten the mood. But as the night deepened, the scratching continued. Once, the laughter that had filled the air faded into an unsettling silence. I lay there, every muscle taut, straining to catch the sounds that danced around the cabin. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. Then came the tapping on the window, as if something were testing the glass. Olivia stirred beside me, her voice barely a whisper. "Dan, do you hear that?" I nodded, unable to trust my own voice. We clung to each other, breaths shallow, as the tapping moved from window to window. After what felt like an eternity, it finally ceased. Eventually, we drifted into a restless sleep, and as dawn began to break the next morning, we found ourselves pondering the events of the day. Perhaps it was the raccoons, or maybe a particularly persistent owl that had stirred our imaginations. We had spent the day hiking and swimming in a nearby lake, the bright sunshine making the terrors of the night seem distant and almost silly. But as evening descended and we returned to the cabin, that familiar sense of unease began to creep back in. We double-checked all the locks, drew the curtains tight, and attempted to distract ourselves with board games and wine. Yet, the scratching began earlier that night, more insistent than before, and this time it was accompanied by something else. A low, unsettling sound. A guttural sound echoed through the stillness, almost resembling a voice. Marcus, with a pale face illuminated by the lamplight, whispered to Olivia, "That's not an animal." I longed to comfort her, to suggest it was merely the wind or our minds weaving tales of fright. Yet, as the sound, this not-quite voice, intensified, forming shapes of nearly recognizable words, I found myself unable to deceive her or even my own heart. We nestled together on the bed, our eyes fixed on the shadows creeping beneath the door, listening intently as whatever lurked outside circled the cabin, again and again. At one moment, a heavy thud resonated, as if something had thrown itself against the walls, amplifying the tension in the air. Against the front door, the wind howled, making the whole cabin shudder. I contemplated making a dash for the car, but the keys lay in the living room, and the thought of opening any door felt insurmountable. So we waited, clinging to each other as the night stretched on, seemingly endless. Just before dawn, in that darkest hour when hope felt farthest away, we heard a new sound. Footsteps on the porch, followed by a knock at the door. A human knock. "Hello? Anyone in there?" A man's voice, gruff yet reassuringly normal. We approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole, and there stood George. On the porch, the cabin owner stood with a flashlight, casting a beam into the darkness. I opened the door, relief washing over me. "George, thank God." I breathed. "There's something out here," he interrupted, pushing past us into the cabin. "I know, that's why I'm here. You two okay?" We nodded, still trembling. George quickly surveyed the cabin, checking the windows and doors. Once satisfied, he turned to us, his expression serious. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have told you the whole truth when you arrived, but I was afraid you'd leave and I need the—" In a moment of honesty, money was the topic that surfaced, as Olivia's demands hung heavy in the air. George sighed, his demeanor shifting, revealing a weariness that seemed to age him. "This land," he began, "it's not right. It never has been, as far back as I can recall. There are things that dwell in these woods, things that defy nature. Most of the time, they keep to themselves, but when new blood arrives, they grow curious." A chill crept down my spine. "What kind of things?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "I can't say for sure. I've never seen them clearly, but I felt their presence, heard the whispers in the dark." As we sat together, the atmosphere thick with an unspoken tension, Olivia's question hung in the air. "Why don't you leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. George, with a calm demeanor, replied, "This land's been in my family for generations." His tone shifted, becoming almost conspiratorial as he continued, "I don't think they'd let me." The night wore on, and we found ourselves nestled in the living room, the shadows dancing around us. George shared tales of the mysterious beings that roamed the woods, stories passed down through his lineage. He spoke of those who had vanished over the years, of nights when the veil between our world and another grew thin, leaving us captivated and uneasy in the dim light. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the trees, George stood up and said, "They'll be gone now. They can't stand the daylight. You two should pack up and go. I'll refund your money." We didn't argue. Within an hour, we were in our car, speeding down the mountain road, the cabin receding in our rearview mirror. We never talked much about what happened that weekend. How could we explain it to anyone else? Even between ourselves, we found it easier to let the memory fade, focusing instead on our normal, safe lives. In the heart of the city, there are moments, particularly on those dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees, that I find myself attuned to a peculiar scratching sound. It lingers in the air, and in the depths of my dreams, I can still hear that almost voice, calling softly from beyond the walls, attempting to form words that I hope to never comprehend. The woods hold secrets, and I remain uncertain of what dwells within their shadows, or why it seemed so drawn to us. What might have happened if it had crossed that threshold into our world? Yet, I am aware that there exist places where the boundary between our reality and the unknown is perilously thin, where things we cannot fathom linger just out of sight. If you ever find yourself in a secluded cabin miles from civilization and you hear a scratching at the door or a tapping at the window, remember my story. Keep the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and whatever you do, don't let it in. Because once you acknowledge those things in the dark, once you let them know you can hear them, they'll never stop calling. Sooner or later, curiosity, fear, or simple exhaustion might lead you to answer. Take it from me, some calls are better left unanswered. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some woods are best left unexplored. no matter how inviting they might seem in the light of day. The voice crackled through the CB radio, desperate and filled with static. "Please, anyone, I need help. I'm at the old crossroads haven. Something's here. Oh God, it's coming back. Please hurry." Then nothing but dead air. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white as I stared out at the empty highway stretching before me. The rational part of my brain urged me to ignore it, to keep driving, but 20 years on the road had taught me to listen to the whispers of the night. In the stillness of the American night, a lesson emerged from the vast emptiness. Sometimes, a trucker is the only barrier between a stranger and impending disaster. With a quiet murmur of frustration, I activated my turn signal and took the next exit. Little did I know, that choice would usher me into a nightmare that lingers in my thoughts. I am Nathan Callahan, a freight hauler traversing the country since I first obtained my CDL. Along the lonely highways, I have encountered my fair share of peculiar occurrences, ghostly lights and inexplicable phenomena that haunt the shadows. The weather patterns were unusual, and some might even say they spotted UFOs, but nothing in all my years could have prepared me for what I encountered that night at the abandoned straight truck stop. It was a typical run from Minneapolis to Amami with a trailer full of electronics. I was making good time, the miles melting away beneath my wheels as I cruised through the Montana desert. The radio kept me company, a mix of old country tunes and the occasional chatter from other truckers. It was just past 2 a.m. When the distress call came through, I initially dismissed it as mere mischief from some kids playing on the channel. It certainly wouldn't be the first time. Yet, something in that voice, the raw fear, the desperation, made me pause. I attempted to respond, hoping to gather more information, but there was only the eerie static in return. I recalled the Starlight, a once popular stop, a little oasis of neon and greasy food in the middle of nowhere. It had shut down years ago, another casualty of the new highway bypass. Now it stood as a crumbling relic, slowly being reclaimed by the encroaching shadows of time. As I drove by the desert, taking the exit, a chill settled in my gut. What if this was a trap? It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried to lure a trucker off the main road with a fake distress call. Yet, I couldn't shake the memory of that terrified voice. If someone truly was in trouble out here, they didn't have many options for help. The old access road was little more than a pair of tire tracks now, with weeds growing through the cracks in the asphalt. My headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the scrub around me. Amidst the scattered brush and the whisper of wind-blown debris, a figure emerged from the shadows, ethereal and haunting. It was the Crossroads Haven, a place that had once thrived, now cloaked in decay. The neon sign, once a beacon of cheer, lay dark and broken, its tubes shattered like forgotten dreams. The main building's windows were boarded, and the roof sagged under the weight of neglect. The vast parking lot, once bustling with travelers from distant lands, now lay desolate, save for the tumbleweeds and shards of glass that crunched underfoot. I parked before the main entrance, the engine's hum a solitary companion in the enveloping silence. Was oppressive, broken only by the idle of my truck and the creak of settling metal as the old building shifted in the night wind. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and lost in the emptiness. "Anyone here?" I heard a distress call on the CB. Nothing, not even an echo. I grabbed my flashlight from the cab and cautiously approached the building. The boards over the main doors had been pried away, leaving a dark maw that seemed to swallow my light. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my truck and drive away, but I couldn't shake the memory of that desperate voice. What if someone was trapped inside, unable to call out? I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight revealing a scene of decay and abandonment. Overturned tables, shattered plates, and layers of dust covered everything. It looked as though scavengers had picked the place clean years ago. "Hello," I called again, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Is anyone here?" A sound from the back of the building made me jump. A scraping noise, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Hey, you okay back there? I moved towards the sound, my heart pounding as I rounded the corner into what used to be the kitchen. My flashlight beam fell on something that made my blood run cold. There, propped up against an old stove, was a CB radio. It looked brand new, completely out of place in the ruin around it. I approached slowly, my mind racing. Had the person who called for help left this here? But why and where were they now? That's when I noticed something else on the floor. Around the radio were strange markings, curved lines. Symbols etched in what appeared to be dried blood caught my eye, and I instinctively took a step back, suddenly aware of the eerie silence that enveloped me. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, I heard it, a low, guttural sound emanating from somewhere behind me. It was almost a voice, but not quite. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as I slowly turned around. There, in the doorway, stood a figure. In that fleeting moment before terror gripped me, my mind struggled to comprehend what I was witnessing. It was vaguely humanoid, yet too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at angles that defied nature. And its face, oh, its face was merely a blank expanse of pale skin, a mouth that split it from top to bottom. I wish I could say I fought back or at least had the sense to flee, but the truth is, I stood frozen, rooted to the spot as that thing unfolded itself, growing taller, flowing into the room like smoke given form. It reached for me with hands that resembled claws, and I felt my consciousness slipping away. The last thing I recall is the crackling of the CB radio, Andrew's desperate voice calling out for help. I awoke in my truck, parked quietly on the side of the highway. For a fleeting moment, I believed it had all been a vivid nightmare. Yet, as I glanced down, the dust coating my clothes and the scratches on my arms told a different story. There, on the passenger seat, lay the CB radio from the abandoned truck stop. My logbook revealed a troubling truth. I had lost nearly 6 hours, hours that were shrouded in a thick fog of forgetfulness. With a sense of unease, I drove to the nearest town, my mind in a daze. I checked into a motel, seeking solace, yet I couldn't shake the haunting question. Had I truly witnessed what I thought I had, or had my mind woven a tapestry of impossible horrors to fill the void? There were gaps in my memory, and I pondered the idea of going to the police. But what could I possibly say? That I had been lured to an abandoned truck stop by a ghost on the CB, only to be attacked by some kind of monster? They would surely laugh me out of the station, or worse, lock me up for my own safety. In the end, I did what felt necessary. I got back on the road and completed my run. Yet, everything changed after that night. I found myself jumping at shadows, flinching every time the CB crackled with static. I began to take different routes that felt safer, though I knew deep down that the darkness still lingered, waiting just beyond the light. I steered clear of those long, desolate stretches of highway, even if it meant taking the longer route. That CB radio, I just couldn't part with it, yet having it in my truck felt unbearable. Now it rests in a storage unit, bound in chains and locked away in a box. Some nights, I swear I can hear it whispering, that desperate voice of Andrew calling for help. Since then, I've sought to uncover more about Crossroads Haven. It seems to carry a weighty history, filled with tales of disappearances that stretch back decades, of truckers who once stopped there and were never seen again. Local legends whisper of ancient burial grounds and doorways to other worlds. I find myself at a loss, unsure of what to believe. Was my experience real, or merely a figment of my imagination, or perhaps something in between? Yet, one truth remains. There are things in the darkness that elude our understanding, lurking at the fringes of our world, patiently waiting for someone to heed their call. So, if you ever find yourself on a lonely road late at night and hear a desperate voice on the CB, pleading for help, consider this. Before you respond, take a moment to reflect. Sometimes, the plea for assistance may not originate from a person in distress, but rather from the very essence of trouble itself. If you ever find yourself passing an abandoned truck stop in the desolate expanse of the Montana desert, I urge you to keep moving. Do not glance back, And above all, do not stop. For in the shadows, unseen forces may be lurking, ready to ensnare you in a nightmare from which you may never awaken. As for me, I continue to drive, but I avoid the night whenever possible, always keeping my CB close at hand. It was a moment when the world seemed to hold its breath, the road stretching out before me, lonely yet familiar. I had learned that some calls are best left unanswered, and some mysteries, perhaps, are meant to remain unsolved. As I stepped onto the porch that morning, a profound silence enveloped me. There was no cheerful bird song, no distant lowing of cattle, not even the gentle whisper of the wind through the cornfields. Instead, an eerie, oppressive quiet settled around me, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. And then my gaze fell upon it. A vast, intricate pattern carved into my wheat field, the stalks bent and woven with an impossible precision that sent a shiver down my spine. In that moment, as the rising sun cast long shadows across the land, I felt a shift within me, a realization that my life would never be the same. What I didn't yet understand was just how deep the rabbit hole would go or the dangers that awaited me in the truth. My name is Robert Martinez, and for over 30 years, I have tended to this land, a legacy passed down through generations, from father to son, ever since my great-grandfather first broke ground here in 1875. I have weathered droughts, floods, and all manner of trials, yet nothing could have prepared me for the events that were about to unfold that day. It began in the summer, a time that seemed so peaceful at first. One night, a few of my cows became unsettled, breaking through the fence and racing across the north pasture. It was unusual, yet not entirely unexpected. Then, my tractor began to misbehave, its electronics flickering and failing without explanation. It was bothersome, but nothing too surprising for aging farm machinery. However, then came the lights. About a week before the crop circle made its appearance, I was up late, poring over some paperwork in the kitchen when a sudden flash of light outside drew my attention. Initially, I believed it to be the headlights of a distant vehicle, but given our isolation, our nearest neighbor a full 5 miles away, I stepped outside to investigate. That's when I beheld them. 3 luminous orbs, hovering silently above my wheat field. They pulsed with an ethereal glow, casting elongated shadows that danced across the swaying stalks. I stood there, frozen in place, time stretching out around me, though it was likely only a few minutes. Then, as abruptly as they had appeared, the lights shot straight up into the night sky and disappeared. I reassured myself that I was simply tired. Perhaps I had drifted into slumber at the Richardson table, lost in a dream. Yet a part of me understood that what I had witnessed was indeed real. The following nights, I kept my vigil, eyes peeled for the return of those lights, but they did not come back. Just as doubt began to creep in, I awoke to a sight that took my breath away. A crop circle, vast and sprawling, covering nearly half of my 100-acre wheat field. The design was a marvel, intricate and elaborate. A series of interlocking circles and crescents spiraling outward from a central point. The wheat stalks were not broken but rather bent, woven together in a manner that spoke of something beyond our understanding. It was a situation that seemed to slip through the fingers of reason. I reached out to the sheriff, not so much for hope, but out of a sense of duty. Bob, a friend of many years, stood by, his eyes reflecting doubt as he took in the scene before him. Could be pranksters, he mused, though his tone betrayed a lack of conviction. You know how kids are in the summer, always chasing thrills. I shook my head, feeling the weight of the truth. Bob, this would have required a whole team working through the night, and they would have left traces behind. Look at the ground. There's not a single footprint or tire track to be found. He found himself without a response, as whispers traveled swiftly through the small town. By noon, my driveway was filled with the curious, amateur paranormal investigators and local news crews alike. I tried to keep them at bay, but it felt like an impossible task, as if I were attempting to hold back the ocean. That was when the peculiarities began to unfold. It started with the animals. My dogs, typically friendly to a fault, turned aggressive, snarling at anyone who dared approach the crop circle. The cattle, too, seemed unsettled, refusing to graze anywhere near that field, huddling together in a state of unease. At the far end of the pasture, a low bellow echoed uneasily through the night. Then, the equipment failures began to escalate. It wasn't just my tractor anymore, but every piece of electronic equipment on the farm. Cell phones, once fully charged, died within minutes. The television emitted nothing but static, occasionally interrupted by bursts of what sounded like voices speaking in an unknown language. And the dreams, oh, the dreams. Each night, I found myself wandering through that wheat field, the stalks whispering and singing around me in voices just on the edge of comprehension. Comprehension eluded me, always lingering just ahead, just out of sight. I would awaken in a cold sweat, the metallic taste lingering in my mouth, accompanied by the unsettling sensation that I was on the brink of grasping something vast and terrible. About a week after the crop circle emerged, a visitor arrived. He introduced himself as Dr. William Harrison, an astrophysicist from the State University. He was unlike the other investigators who had come to pry. He was quieter, more serious. "Mr. Martinez," he said, his gaze fixed intently on the crop circle, "have you noticed? Have there been any other unusual phenomena since this appeared? Lights in the sky, perhaps electronic disturbances?" The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "How did you know about that?" He turned to me, his expression grave. "Because this isn't the first time this has happened. There's a pattern, Mr. Martinez. These events are escalating." Over the next few hours, Dr. Harrison shared things that shook me to my core, stories of other crop circles, all following a similar design, appearing across the country over the past few years, along with increased UFO sightings. In those shadowy regions, whispers lingered about individuals who vanished, often in the weeks that followed the emergence of a peculiar circle. He spoke softly, suggesting that these might be test sites, a prelude to something far more significant orchestrated by an unknown intelligence. I yearned to brush it off as mere folly, yet the weight of my own encounters held me captive. What could they desire? My throat felt parched as I posed the question. Dr. Harrison, with a solemn shake of his head, replied, "We do not know, but we suspect you may be in peril, Mr. Martinez. These sites carry an unsettling aura. The people closest to them were affected. We documented instances of strange behavior from those who claimed to receive messages or commands from an unseen force." As he spoke, a chill crept down my spine, and I recalled my dreams of the whispers, lingering just beyond comprehension. "What should I do?" I inquired. "Let us set up some monitoring equipment," he replied. "And whatever you do, don't enter that field. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think you see, promise me." I promised, but I would soon discover that keeping promises can be a daunting challenge when reality itself seemed to unravel around you. The next few days were a blur of activity. Dr. Friedman and his team set up cameras and sensors around the perimeter of the crop circle, taking samples of the soil and the wheat, muttering to each other in low, worried tones. All the while, the whispers in my dreams grew louder, more insistent. I would wake up with strange symbols etched in my mind, my fingers itching to draw them. The urge to walk into that field, to reach the center of the circle, became almost overwhelming. It all came to a head on the seventh night after the circle made its mysterious appearance. I was stirred from my slumber by an unfamiliar sound, a low, thrumming vibration that resonated from all directions, yet felt as if it came from nowhere at all. With a sense of urgency, I made my way to the window, and my heart froze at the sight before me. The crop circle glowed, pulsating with a gentle blue-white light that seemed to throb in harmony with the eerie sound. Above it, the lights I had encountered before were now descending, drawing me in. I cannot recall the moment I chose to step outside. One moment I was gazing from the window, and then I was compelled to venture forth. In the stillness of the night, I found myself racing across the yard, clad only in my pajamas, drawn irresistibly toward the circle that beckoned me. Dr. Harrison's warning lingered in my mind, a distant echo that felt almost trivial in the face of my urgency. All I could think of was reaching the center of that circle to confront whatever was descending from the sky. As I approached the edge of the wheat field, a sudden grip on my arm halted my advance. It was Dr. Harrison, his face illuminated by an otherworldly glow, pale and urgent. "Martinez, no!" he shouted, his voice barely piercing through the pulsating sound that surrounded us. "If you go in there, we'll lose you." I felt the struggle within me, a battle against the pull of the unknown. His grip was steady, a reassuring presence amidst the chaos of the whispers in my head, drowning out all else. Slowly, painfully, I felt the compulsion begin to fade. We stood transfixed as the lights descended into the center of the crop circle. A flash so bright erupted, leaving spots dancing in my vision. And then, just like that, the lights vanished. The thrumming ceased, and the crop circle lay dark and still. In the days that followed, government agents swarmed my farm, digging up the crop circle, testing every grain of soil repeatedly. I found myself questioned for hours, lost in the unsettling aftermath of that night. Dr. Harrison and his team searched diligently, yet they uncovered nothing. No radiation, no strange elements, nothing to suggest that anything unusual had transpired. The official narrative shifted to that of an elaborate hoax, despite the absence of evidence to back such a claim. But I am certain of what I witnessed, of what I experienced. 5 years have passed since that fateful night, and I continue to tend to the land, though it feels altered now. The wheat refuses to flourish in that particular field, regardless of our efforts. On still nights, I find myself pondering, and sometimes, I think I can still hear those whispers lingering in the air. At the edge of my mind, there lingers a thought. Sometimes, when I gaze up at the stars, an unsettling feeling washes over me, as if something up there is observing, waiting. I often ponder what might have unfolded had I ventured to the center of that circle. The future remains a mystery, shrouded in uncertainty. Yet one truth stands clear: we are not alone. The universe, with its unfathomable depths, holds secrets more peculiar and chilling than we can fathom. So, should you ever stumble upon an unusual pattern etched into your fields or witness lights in the sky that dance in ways you've never encountered, keep my words close to your heart. Once upon a time, in a stillness that felt almost too heavy, I found myself drawn to a scene that whispered secrets of the night. The coffee cup, still warm, was an unsettling reminder that I was not alone. It wasn't the eerie silence that gripped me, nor the abandoned cars, nor even the fresh tire tracks that seemed to lead into the void. No, it was that paper cup, resting carelessly in the trash, steam curling upward like a ghostly finger beckoning me closer. Someone had been there just moments before, yet the rest stop lay deserted, a chilling contrast to the warmth of the cup. As I stood there, a shiver danced along my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement, lurking at the edge of my vision, urging me to look closer. In the stillness of the woods, a figure lingered, and in that fleeting moment, a chill crept over me. I realized I had wandered into a realm I was never meant to witness, a place from which I might not find my way back. My name is Christopher, and for nearly a decade, I've been traversing this vast country, my life entwined with the rhythm of long-haul trucking. It may not be the most glamorous existence, but it fills my pockets and quenches my thirst for adventure. Along the way, I've encountered my fair share of peculiarities. Strange lights dancing in the night sky, ghost towns that seem to have slipped from the pages of any map, and events that some would label as supernatural. Yet, nothing could prepare me for what lay ahead. Nothing could have truly prepared me for the events that unfolded that night at Cedar Valley Rest Area. It was meant to be a routine run from St. Louis to Boston, my trailer laden with electronics. I had been pushing myself hard, trying to make up for lost time after a delay at my previous stop. The night was devoid of moonlight, the highway appearing as a dark ribbon stretching endlessly ahead. I had been battling sleep for the past hour, my eyes gritty and my mind clouded, when I finally spotted the sign for the rest stop. A wave of relief washed over me. Just a quick break, I reassured myself, perhaps a splash of water to revive my senses. As I pulled into the rest stop, it emerged from the darkness like a beacon of light, an older establishment with a modest building that housed restrooms and vending machines, alongside a designated area for trucks. A few cars were scattered in the lot, yet no figures stirred about. I parked my rig and stepped out, stretching my muscles that had grown weary from hours of confinement. The air hung heavy with an eerie stillness. No breeze, no chirping of insects, no distant hum of traffic. Just an unsettling silence that should have sent a shiver down my spine. As I approached the building, my footsteps echoed softly against the concrete, a rhythmic sound in the stillness of the night. The door creaked open, a sound that seemed to pierce the quiet air inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed gently, casting a stark glare over the empty space. I made my way to the men's room, splashing cold water on my face, feeling it trickle down my neck. When I glanced up at my reflection, haggard and pale, something caught my eye. In the mirror, just beyond the partially open door behind me, I noticed a flicker of movement that made my heart skip a beat. Just a shadow, really, but distinctly human-shaped. I whirled around, yet the doorway remained empty. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and nervous, even to my own ears. No response. Shaking it off as a trick of my tired mind, I left the restroom and headed for the vending machines. That's when I noticed the other oddities. A robe draped over a chair as if its owner had just stepped away. A smartphone on a table with its screen still lit up. And there, in the trash can by the door, that steaming cup of coffee. My skin prickled with goosebumps. Where was everyone? As I stepped back outside, I took a moment to scan the parking lot. The cars I had seen earlier remained, some with their doors hanging open, adding to the eerie stillness. I approached the nearest one, a blue sedan, noticing the keys left in the ignition, the engine softly ticking as it cooled. "Hey!" I called out, my voice echoing across the empty expanse. The silence that followed was almost palpable. It was then that I noticed the tire tracks, fresh ones, leading from one of the parking spots and stopping abruptly at the edge of the lot, as if the car had simply vanished into thin air. My heart raced at the thought. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline sweeping away the fog of exhaustion clouding my thoughts. Something was very, very wrong here. I turned, intending to run back to my truck and escape this unsettling place. That's when I saw it, the figure at the edge of the woods. It was human-shaped, yet somehow off, too tall, too thin, its proportions unsettlingly distorted. It stood perfectly still, half hidden behind a tree, watching me. I froze, caught in its gaze like a rabbit before a wolf. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, it raised a hand, beckoning. Terror jolted through me like a lightning strike. With a jolt of electricity coursing through me, I found myself sprinting back to my truck, moving with a speed I never knew I had. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, cursing softly when they slipped from my grasp, scattering across the gravel. As I pulled myself into the cab, I dared to glance back. The figure had drawn closer, no longer concealed by the trees. Under the harsh glare of the rest stop lights, it came into view, and oh, how I wished it hadn't. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tightly over an impossible frame. Its face was smooth, featureless, save for the deep-set hollows where eyes should have been. Eyes that glimmered in the darkness like a cat's, and a mouth that stretched from ear to ear, filled with needle-sharp teeth. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life as I slammed the truck into gear. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. More figures emerging from the woods, dozens of them, all with that eerie, impossible physiology, moving with an unsettling, fluid grace. I floored it, the truck's tires spinning in the gravel before finally finding traction. I tore away from that rest stop, as if pursued by all the demons of the night. Hell was on my tail, and for all I knew, they were relentless. I drove for hours, pushing well past the legal limit for consecutive time behind the wheel. I didn't stop until the sun was high in the sky and I found myself 2 states away. Even then, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling of being watched. When I finally gathered the courage to check my mirrors, the highway behind me was empty. No sign of pursuit, no hint of the horror I had left behind. Yet, the memory of those figures, that beckoning hand, was etched into my mind, lingering like a shadow in the corners of my thoughts. As I recounted the events, I found myself pondering who might believe my tale. It would surely sound like the ramblings of a madman, speaking of creatures lurking at a rest stop. So, I chose silence, completing my run while attempting to dismiss the experience as mere fatigue-induced hallucination. Yet, the memory lingered, haunting my thoughts. I couldn't shake the image of those individuals at the rest stop, their abandoned cars, their forgotten belongings. What had compelled them to follow that mysterious hand into the depths of the woods? Where had they vanished to, and what fate awaited them in the shadows of those trees? As I delved deeper into the mystery, I found myself navigating a path fraught with uncertainty. I am no detective, and the clues were scarce. Yet what I uncovered sent a shiver down my spine. Whispers echoed among long-haul truckers and late-night travelers, tales of rest stops where individuals simply disappeared, leaving no trace behind. A shadowy figure lurked at the edge of the woods, always appearing at night, always beckoning. Some claimed they were aliens, while others suggested they were interdimensional beings. A few even spoke of ancient, forgotten gods stirring in our modern world. The truth of these stories eluded me, but their chilling essence lingered in the air. There's a sense of unease that lingers in the air, a whisper of something waiting just beyond the reach of the headlights. I can't quite grasp what they desire, yet I feel their presence lurking at the edges of lonely highways, hidden in the shadows of late-night rest stops. I find myself driving, but I prefer to do so in the light of day, steering clear of those rest areas, pushing onward from one town to the next without pause. If I catch sight of a solitary figure at the forest's edge, my heart quickens, and I press on. During those long stretches, when the night envelopes the road, I sometimes glimpse them in my mirrors, tall, thin silhouettes keeping pace with my journey. As I drive my truck, feeling the rush of speed, I find myself watching and waiting. Sometimes, I ponder whether I truly escaped that night or if I remain ensnared in a realm that feels like a dream, living a life that isn't entirely my own. So, if you find yourself on a late-night drive and a rest stop materializes from the darkness, take a moment to reconsider. Check your gas gauge, your caffeine levels, your weariness. Ask yourself if it's worth the risk, for you can never be certain of what lurks in the shadows, or who, or what might be waiting for you there. The trees was a figure, shrouded in darkness, its presence both haunting and mesmerizing. As you gaze deeper into the image, the chill of the night air seems to wrap around you, whispering secrets of the forest. Each snap of the camera had drawn you closer to an unseen danger, a reminder that some paths are best left unexplored. The shadows danced, and with each flicker of light, the sense of unease grew stronger. Remember, dear listener, the woods may call to you, but heed this warning. Not all who wander return to tell the tale. 2 ancient pines stood sentinel, and there, amidst their towering forms, was a figure, humanoid, yet somehow wrong. It loomed too tall, too thin, its proportions twisted in a way that defied the very essence of nature. It was staring directly at me, through the camera lens, and I felt a chill run down my spine. With trembling hands, I lowered the viewfinder, my eyes flitting nervously to the encroaching shadows that deepened around my campsite. Night was descending, and I realized I was no longer alone in these woods. My name is Catherine Richardson, and for nearly a decade, I have roamed the wilds as a nature photographer. I have trekked through rainforests, scaled mountains, and waded through swamps in pursuit of the perfect shot. But this was different. Nothing in all my years of experience could have prepared me for what I encountered in the depths of the Redwood Valley forest. It was supposed to be a routine assignment, a solo expedition to capture the raw beauty of the old-growth forest for a conservation magazine. I had done dozens of trips like this before, and I was looking forward to the solitude, to immersing myself in nature without the distractions of the modern world. The first few days were idyllic. The forest was a photographer's dream, all towering evergreens draped in shadows. In the embrace of moths and hidden waterfalls, with dappled sunlight weaving through the canopy, I established my base camp in a small clearing beside a babbling stream. Each day, I ventured out to explore and capture the beauty around me. It was on the fourth night that the atmosphere shifted. As I reviewed the day's photographs, I stumbled upon something peculiar lurking in the background of one image, a shape faintly discernible in the shadows between two trees. At first, I brushed it off as a mere trick of the light or perhaps a deer, yet an unsettling feeling lingered, tugging at my curiosity. The following day, I found myself back at the Andrew spot, a sense of determination guiding my steps as I sought to uncover the mystery of what I had captured. I carefully set up my camera trap, a device designed to activate with motion, and left it there while I ventured into other parts of the woods. When I returned that evening to review the footage, my heart raced with anticipation. Dozens of images flashed before me in rapid succession. The initial frames revealed nothing out of the ordinary, just the forest floor and a squirrel or two. But then, a figure emerged, tall and impossibly thin, its long, spindly limbs bending at angles that defied nature itself. Its skin, where visible, was pale and almost translucent, stretched tight over an inhuman frame. And its face, its face, was smooth and featureless, save for two large dark eyes that reflected the camera's flash like a cat's. I stared at the images, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hoax, a trick played by some other hiker with too much time on their hands and a talent for Photoshop. But as I flipped through the sequence of photos, a chill ran down my spine. The figure was moving closer to the camera. With each shot in the final image, long fingers reached toward the lens, blurred with motion. I packed up my gear with trembling hands and hurried back to my campsite. That night, sleep eluded me as I jumped at every snapping twig and rustle of leaves. I reassured myself that I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation, but deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. The next morning, I awoke to find my campsite in disarray. My backpack had been emptied, its contents scattered about, and my food cache hung high in a tree. To shield it from the bear, the rope had been severed, snapping like a mere thread. There, pressed into a patch of soft earth near my tent, lay a long, narrow footprint, its toes resembling claws. My camera rested beside it, and with trembling fingers, I powered it on to review the latest images. My heart nearly ceased as I discovered new photos captured while I slept. Images of my tent, of me slumbering within, visible through the mesh window. In each frame, that figure loomed closer and closer. They had departed, leaving me to pack up and hike out. Assignment be damned. Yet, a blend of curiosity, stubbornness, and perhaps a touch of foolishness kept me rooted in place. I told myself that if I could only capture clearer photos, if I could just comprehend what this entity truly was, everything would fall into place. So I remained, and with each passing night, the creature drew nearer. I set up more camera traps around my campsite, capturing image after image of the being as it circled my tent. Sleep eluded me. I spent my nights cocooned in my sleeping bag, clutching my hunting knife, flinching at every rustle in the dark. During the day, I would wander along trails marked by broken branches and peculiar footprints. I discovered areas where the undergrowth lay flattened, as if something substantial had passed through. Once, I stumbled upon a tuft of hair snagged on a branch, coarse and gray, unlike any animal fur I had ever encountered. As the days unfolded, a sense of unease began to creep in. The forest, once a beautiful and welcoming place, now felt ominous. The trees towered above me, their branches stretching out like fingers, and I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that enveloped me, being watched even in broad daylight. Yet I remained, driven by an insatiable need to understand and document the strange occurrences around me. This obsession reached its peak on what was meant to be my final night in the forest. I had planned to hike out in the morning, my assignment nearly complete, though my sanity felt precariously thin. I set up my cameras for one last night of observation, clinging to the hope of capturing that elusive shot that would validate my experiences. Despite the fear that gripped me, I must have dozed off, for I awoke suddenly in the pitch black of my tent. A shift had occurred. The familiar sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of insects, had faded into an eerie silence. Outside, something was moving, softly yet unmistakably, circling and sniffing. I lay there, frozen in fear, as it completed its circuit. Then, to my horror, I noticed the zipper of my tent begin to move, slowly, inch by agonizing inch. The opening widened before me, and though I longed to scream, to run, to do anything, my body remained unresponsive. I could only watch, eyes wide in the darkness, as the night unfolded its chilling tale. A long, pale hand with an unsettling number of joints slipped through the opening. It paused, as if attuned to my fear, before deliberately reaching for my camera, which lay beside my sleeping bag. In that moment, survival instinct surged, breaking through my paralysis. I lunged for the camera, snatching it away from that dreadful hand. With a swift motion, I kicked out at the tent wall, tearing through the fabric and tumbling into the night. I ran blindly, desperately clutching the camera to my chest, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over roots, and feeling branches whip against me. As I hurried through the darkened woods, a presence lingered just behind me, not in haste but gliding with an unsettling grace, weaving through the trees like a wisp of smoke. Time lost its meaning as I pushed forward, my lungs aflame and legs weary, yet the grip of fear propelled me onward. At last, a glimmer of hope appeared in the distance. The ranger station, a sanctuary amidst the encroaching shadows. I stumbled into the clearing, breathless and trembling, and the ranger, taken aback by my disheveled state and frantic gaze, quickly ushered me inside, securing the door with a firm click, as if to keep the darkness at bay. The rest of that night fades into a haze, a series of fragmented memories. I recall sharing my tale, the ranger's initial skepticism shifting to a deep concern as he caught sight of the genuine fear etched across my face. I remember the police arriving, their questions steady as they took my statement. And then came the moment they requested to see my camera. With trembling hands, I powered it on and began to scroll through the images. Yet, where there should have been countless photos of that otherworldly being, there was only emptiness. Just trees, shadows, and the familiar scenes of the forest. Even the images from that final night, the ones I had hoped to find, were nowhere to be seen. As I sat in the harsh fluorescent light of the ranger station, surrounded by the familiar comforts of civilization, the memory of the hand reaching into my tent began to fade, like a distant echo of a bad dream. Had I truly imagined it all? Perhaps 2 weeks of solitude in the deep woods had pushed my mind to the brink. But then, in the very last photo on my camera, I caught a glimpse of something unsettling. Barely visible in the background, a tall, thin figure lurked, half hidden behind a tree. The image was blurry, yet I could swear it wore a smile that sent a chill down my spine. I have never returned since. Returning to those woods, I have yet to share the complete tale with anyone, save for you, my editor. You received a diluted account, merely a story of being startled by wildlife, and the photographs I provided were meticulously selected to highlight only the forest's natural beauty. Yet, on those dark nights, when the wind softly whispers through the trees outside my window, I can't help but ponder what lies hidden in the depths of the woods. I think of the things that linger just beyond the grasp of our cameras and comprehension, and a shiver runs down my spine. It lingers, a presence that seeps into your very bones, ever watchful, ever patient, waiting for the next curious photographer to wander into its realm. So, if you find yourself in the wilderness, poised to capture the untouched beauty of nature, take heed of the shadows that dance between the trees. Should you catch a glimpse of something shifting there, something that feels out of place, resist the urge to document it. Instead, flee. Run swiftly and do not glance back, for some entities in this world are best left unrecorded, and once they become aware of your gaze, the consequences may be dire. As you notice them, you realize they never forget, never cease their watchful gaze. Sooner or later, they come for you. The first time I laid eyes on her, I was struck by the uncanny resemblance. Shoulder-length brown hair, green eyes, even the tiny scar above my left eyebrow from a childhood mishap. But this was no mere reflection. It was a living, breathing woman who could have been my twin. Our eyes locked across the bustling dining room, and a chill coursed through me as she smiled and waved. In that moment, I understood with a sickening certainty that my tranquil Caribbean cruise had just taken a turn into the unknown. As I drifted into uncharted waters, I found myself reflecting on my name, Rachel Parker. Until that moment, I had been savoring a much-needed vacation aboard the Celestial Voyager, a luxury cruise liner gliding through the turquoise embrace of the Caribbean. At 32, I was a software engineer from Minneapolis, and this was my first genuine escape in years. I had longed for 10 days filled with sun, relaxation, and perhaps a touch of romance, if fortune smiled upon me. The initial days had unfolded just as I had envisioned, with me lounging by the pool and indulging in far too many fruity concoctions. Cocktails flowed freely, and a charming connection blossomed with a dashing fellow named Nathan, who was enjoying the company of his friends. On the fourth evening, during the captain's dinner, the atmosphere shifted. I adorned myself in a lovely blue dress, a special purchase for this voyage. As I entered the grand dining room, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in one of the ornate mirrors and paused to smooth my hair. It was then that I noticed her. At first, I believed it to be merely a trick of the light, a different angle of my own image, but as I turned to look directly at her, a sudden jolt of realization washed over me. She was a separate person, a mirror image of myself, down to the smallest detail. Our eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the bustling dining room faded into the background. She smiled and waved, as if we were old friends. I felt rooted to the spot, my mind swirling with disbelief. This couldn't be real. It had to be some elaborate prank or a vivid hallucination. Just then, a waiter bumped into me, shattering the spell. By the time I looked back, she had vanished, lost in the sea of passengers making their way through the room. As I sat at the table, the chatter of dinner faded into a distant hum. My gaze wandered, restless, searching the room for a familiar face that felt out of place. My doppelganger. I caught a glimpse of her once, seated across the room, but when I blinked, she vanished like a wisp of smoke. "Rachel, are you okay?" Nathan's voice cut through my thoughts, pulling me back to reality. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed to laugh, brushing it off. "Sorry, just a bit tired, I guess. Must be all that sun." Yet, as the night deepened, an unsettling feeling clung to me, whispering questions in the shadows. Who was she, and why did she haunt my thoughts? She looked exactly like me. The next morning, I was determined to find her and seek some answers. I spent hours wandering the ship, checking every restaurant, lounge, and deck, but there was no sign of her. It wasn't until late afternoon that I saw her again. I was heading back to my cabin to prepare for dinner when I caught a glimpse of her turning a corner at the end of the hallway. I broke into a run, but when I rounded the corner, the corridor was empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, my face, smiling at me from across the dining room, as the clock struck 2 a.m. I gave up on sleep and decided to take a walk to clear my head. The ship was eerily quiet as I made my way through the deserted corridors. I found myself on one of the upper decks, leaning against the railing and staring out at the moonlit ocean. That's when I heard it. Footsteps behind me, soft but distinct. I turned, half expecting to see my double, but instead, it was Nathan, looking surprised to see me. "Rachel, what are you doing up so late?" I hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "Nathan, this is going to sound a bit strange, but have you seen anyone on the ship who looks just like me? I mean, exactly like me." He frowned, a look of confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean?" I shared everything about spotting my doppelganger at dinner, about the frantic chase through the ship. As I spoke, I noticed the concern deepening in his eyes. "Rachel," he said gently when I finished, "I think maybe you should talk to the ship's doctor. Stress can do funny things to a person's mind." "I'm not crazy," I snapped, and immediately felt a wave of guilt wash over me at the hurt expression on his face. "I'm sorry, Nathan, but I know what I saw. She's real." He nodded, yet I could sense his disbelief. "All right, how about we investigate tomorrow? If there's truly someone on the ship who resembles you so closely, surely others have noticed as well." I felt a wave of gratitude for his support, even if he thought I was losing my grip on reality. We arranged to meet for breakfast, and I returned to my cabin, feeling a bit lighter. That night, my dreams were filled with mirrors. Endless corridors adorned with mirrors, each reflecting a slightly different version of reality. In a restless night, I awoke, breathless and soaked in sweat. The days that followed blurred into a haze of unease and relentless searching. Nathan and I questioned fellow passengers, scrutinized lists, and even resorted to bribing a junior crew member for a glimpse of the security footage. Yet, my elusive double remained hidden from view. Whispers trailed behind me, and I caught the weight of strange glances from others. More than once, someone would approach, convinced they had just spotted me in a place I had never been. Part of the ship, Nathan remained by my side, though I sensed his patience was beginning to fray. "Maybe it was just someone who looked a lot like you," he suggested one afternoon as we lounged by the pool. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew what I had seen, and I was increasingly convinced that something very strange was unfolding on this ship. It all came to a head on the 8th night of the cruise. After a late-night movie, I was making my way back to my cabin when I caught sight of her. Once more, she stood at the end of the corridor, her gaze fixed upon me. This time, I felt a surge of determination. I would not let her slip away. I dashed toward her, calling out, "Wait! Who are you? Why do you look like me?" In response, she turned and fled, and I pursued her through the ship's twisting corridors.